Good morning, folks. Good morning, good morning. I'd like to call to order the June MTA board meeting. Paige, would you provide an update on quorum for the record?
Good morning. We have a quorum. Also appearing on Zoom are board members Samuel Chu, Blanco Lopez, and John Samuelson.
Great. Thank you, Paige. Before we hear from public speakers, we'll have the usual brief safety announcement.
Your safety is of foremost importance to the MTA. Therefore, we ask that you listen to the following instructions. In the event of an emergency, notify emergency personnel in the room and 911 should be called. If an alarm sounds, wait for a public address announcement and follow instructions. If told to go to another floor or to evacuate the building, leave all unessential items behind and use stairwell A just across the main hallway or stairwell D down the hallway past the elevators. An automated external defibrillator, AED, for use by trained personnel is in the main hallway just past the elevators. Thank you and have a safe day.
Thank you. I wanted, to welcome all our new board members, all our board members, but especially the new ones, but I'm going to do it in my remarks. First, we're going to hear from public speakers. Kate Contino, please go ahead.
Good morning and welcome to the MTA board meeting public comment session. We have 27 members of the public registered to speak today. As a reminder, we ask that all speakers adhere to the MTA's rules of conduct and decorum. I would also like to remind our speakers that in the interest of time and fairness to all, we will limit you to 2 minutes. Please be aware that there will be a warning beep to remind you when you have 30 seconds left to conclude your remarks. Our first speaker will be Jessica Murray, followed by Miriam Fisher. Jessica Murray? Ms. Murray, you may begin.
Hello, good morning. Just wanted to say congratulations on the historic settlement to bring greater accessibility to the subway. Thank you to Mr. Davey also for inviting advocates to meet with you last week. And we welcome new board members. So while I am ecstatic that there is finally a commitment for a timeline and funding for accessibility improvements, this is also not a time to rest on your laurels. I've been the chair of the Advisory Committee on Transit Accessibility for the last 2.5 years. It's been hard to keep it together through a pandemic and multiple leadership changes. And I've worked really hard to make sure that we can have productive conversations in our committee and subcommittee meetings. Edith Prentice's name has been evoked multiple times in relation to this lawsuit. Would she have been happy with the outcome? Of course. Would she have held back in her criticism of everything else that's not working? If you knew Edith, you would laugh at that suggestion. ACTA cannot work if you don't want to hear the complaints of our members. I know it's more satisfying to cut ribbons and celebrate the achievements. You should feel good about the progress that is being made, but you should also know that there are many, many problems remaining. We want to work with you to improve the lives of all of your customers, especially those with disabilities whose experiences are often, frankly, terrible. It's not an easy job, trust me, I know. The settlement was an important step, but it's only the beginning. I hope you, Jano, Richard, Kamel, board members will do your part to make sure that ACTA is not just for show. We invite you to work with us to help move the agency towards greater accessibility for all passengers. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Miriam Fisher, followed by Andy Keto. Ms. Fisher, when you're ready.
Good morning. I'm Rachel Foss, the Senior Research Analyst.
Kate, we can't hear you.
Okay, we're going to move to our in-room speakers while we
Hi, can you hear me now?
Miriam, please go ahead.
Kate,
Okay, virtual speakers, we're going to move to the room. Please stand by. Our next speaker will be Dion Alston,
Get him.
followed by
Get him
Lisa
makeover,
Daglian.
Charlton.
Mr. Alston, go to the mic, please. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dion Alston. I am a 12-year-old rail fanner. If you don't know what a rail fanner is, that's when I record trains and buses and post them on social media. The reason I am standing here today is because I have an issue with the A line, also known as the Apple. Before I jump into that issue, let's look at the modern day A and C lines. So the south terminal for A trains will be Lefferts Boulevard and Far Rockaway. The south terminal for the C train will be
Oh, that was an epic fail.
Euclid Avenue. My issue is the wait time for Far Rockaway bound A trains will be unacceptable. 20 minutes for the next train on a weekday is unacceptable. I have a plan to resolve that. First, you send the C train to Lefferts Boulevard, and all A trains that went to Lefferts Boulevard will go to Far Rockaway. That will resolve the wait time because it will take all A trains that went to Lefferts to go to Far Rockaway. This will cost a little money because you will need to get new boards, such as the ones on the street level that tells you what trains stop here and what station is this. The conductor point, where they point at the zebra board, and the one that tells you where to go on the top of the station. I would also like to give out to my grandma, a shout out to my grandma Aisha Simpson, that got me up here. She is retiring after 38 years of service working for the MTA. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you.
But I am Lisa Daglian, and I'm the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA PCAC, future member right there. Welcome new board members, and welcome back to familiar faces, including our friend Midori. Created by the state legislature, PCAC serves as the voice of subway riders, bus and Staten Island rail riders, and Metro North and Long Island Railroad commuters. We have 3 non-voting seats on the MTA board, held by your colleagues Andrew Albert, Chair of New York City Transit Riders Council, and the longest-serving MTA board member, Randy Glucksman, Chair of the Metro North Railroad Commuter Council, and Jerry Bringman, who is Chair of PCAC and the Long Island Railroad Commuter Council. Our members are appointed by the governor based on recommendations from elected officials in the 12-county MTA region. As trusted advisors to the MTA, our legislative mandate includes researching issues and recommending viable solutions on behalf of the region's millions of riders. We work closely with elected and appointed officials, partners in advocacy, good government groups, labor, the business community, and riders themselves, and the MTA, to support our critical transit network and find collaborative ways to address substantive concerns, including improving equitable service to underserved communities. During the height of the pandemic, we worked extensively with this strong coalition to successfully pursue COVID relief funding, which saved riders from exorbitant fare hikes and unbearable service cuts. Our efforts are far from over. In fact, we must double down as we look ahead to 2026 and the need for new, sustainable operating revenue. Getting riders back on board is essential, but fare box revenue may never come back all the way, and riders can't be expected to make up the difference. We pledge to work with you and to find solutions, much as we join together, to have historic congestion pricing legislation passed. We're staying on top of that as well. The capital program, including the landmark accessibility agreement, Penn Access, 2nd Avenue Subway Phase 2,
Please conclude your remarks.
improved signals, and all of the rest depend on it, and that means riders depend on it. We look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Andy Keto, followed by Andrew Sparberg. The next speaker will be Andy Sparberg.
Okay, can you hear me? I know
Yes.
we're having some problems. Yes, good morning, board members and agency heads. My name is Andrew Sparberg. I am a retired Long Island Railroad manager and still a regular rider. I'm currently a transportation historian and an adjunct at CUNY. I want to address two issues related to the opening of the Grand Central service later this year. First, I respectfully request that the Long Island Railroad resume issuing the paper branch timetables. That was the case before the pandemic. And here's an example of, I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, there's an example of one. I'm quite capable of looking up my information on a device, but I still prefer to carry a paper timetable. I find it very convenient, and now with the beginning of the Grand Central service and all the service changes with that later this year, I think it'll be very convenient for people to have those available as well. Second, I want to address the issue of train service between Long Island and Atlantic Terminal in Brooklyn. I feel that forcing most Brooklyn passengers to transfer at Jamaica over to Platform F is not a good idea, especially in the rush hours. Compared to today's cross-platform transfers, the new setup is physically cumbersome and more time-consuming. The up and over movement is a burden to senior citizens, and I am one of them. I'm still pretty spry. I can get around, but not as fast as I used to. I'm not suggesting that you scrap the Jamaica-Brooklyn shuttles, but I am suggesting that a few more through rush hour trains be provided between Atlantic Terminal and the major branches such as Babylon, Port Jefferson, and Ronkonkoma. I've been riding the Long Island Railroad for 44 years as a commuter, as an employee, and now as a retiree. And my experiences have always been that travelers prefer a one-seat ride between their branch station and the Western Terminal without a change at Jamaica. Don't get me wrong. I'm ecstatic about the new service into Grand Central. It will give me a one-seat ride to my current part-time employment site on 43rd Street near Fifth Avenue. In 1968, when the MTA first announced plans for the East Midtown Station,
Please
I
conclude
was
your
a
remarks.
junior at NYU. Now I'm a retiree and a grandparent. It took 54 years, but it will
Please
be worth
conclude
the
your
wait.
remarks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Alita Dupree, followed by Bradley Brashears.
Thank you again, Chair Jano, Lieber, and members. Alita Dupree for the record. My pronouns are she and her. Hope you can hear me all right. It's good to be back. I hope to get back to New York and visit this place in my background. It's very meaningful to me. You can never have enough Grand Central Terminal. And I'm looking forward to the new Grand Central Madison opening up. And I think we need to hear more about how the elevators are going to be configured. So I might feel a need to use them. And I am encouraged about the ADA settlement. But that's only a minimum. I think that we should work toward trying to do 50 stations a year, especially on lines in equity priority communities where there's long distances between accessible stations. So we really got to work on that and figure out how to do more. And I'm hoping to hear another Omni report. I'd like to know if the pilot is going to expire at the end of July, or if we have a way to make it permanent. And there should be work to ensure that reduced fare users can take full advantage of Omni, because it shouldn't be a choice between paying full fare or getting a damaged reduced fare MetroCard and having to go down to Stone Street. It's a hassle. I've told you about that before. And how can we build a system that is more sustainable? We're getting electric buses and some new locomotives, but I still haven't heard anything about electrifying the Central Branch or the battery-powered train pilot. So I cook breakfast in my all-electric home here that runs on solar. How can we scale that up for our system that is the MTA? So I look forward. Maybe I'll get to be here in person, because I want to come back to New York and ride the subway and see Grand Central Terminal and use it, places that mean a lot to me. Thank you.
Please, thank you. The next The next speaker will be Bradley Brashears, followed by Christopher Greif.
Good morning. I'm Bradley Brashears, Associate Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA Pcac. We were glad to learn about the upcoming BD line work in the Bronx at Monday's Transit Committee meeting, and we hope to hear more about resiliency improvements today, as was mentioned when Board Member Solomon asked about street-level flood treatments. As we head into the summer and hurricane season, riders need to know that there is a game plan to protect and keep the system running safely. But what does resiliency actually mean for transit? It means anticipating, preparing for, and adapting to changing conditions and recovering rapidly from disruptions. Improvements around the system should be implemented through a resiliency lens to help withstand the climate crisis. It's also important that the MTA views sustainability and resiliency as intrinsically connected. Investing in sustainability best practices will in turn help create an even more resilient transit system. The MTA is already sustainable by nature, carrying 40% of the nation's transit riders. But what can be done for the MTA to become even more sustainable and resilient, building upon current efforts? One sure way is to attract more drivers out of cars and onto transit, lowering emissions. PCAC's Freedom Ticket proposal will help do just that. Weekend ridership on the railroads has surpassed pre-pandemic levels, but is still rebounding more slowly than driving. Freedom Ticket expansion will incentivize transit ridership by providing more widespread commuter rail discounts, with free transfers to subways and buses, truly making it one Metro New York. It is the first step in expanding the other important discount commuter rail fare pilot programs currently underway. Even more exciting is the soon-to-be Long Island Railroad service to Grand Central, which will provide capacity needed to expand Freedom Ticket beyond the current Atlantic Ticket pilot that began 4 years ago this month. Bringing regional riders a more equitable transit network will be crucial to regaining ridership and reducing emissions, especially in time for congestion pricing. The time for Freedom Ticket has come. We must take this opportunity to expand the pilot program now. While it will take more than Freedom Ticket to build a more resilient and sustainable MTA, more reliable service and state of good repair improvements included, it can make a difference in bringing drivers onto transit. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Christopher Greif, followed by Gian Paduala.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Christopher D. Greif. Hope everyone's doing well, and happy ADA 32. As Jessica Murphy said earlier, we want to thank everyone, the MTA. Thank you, Jano, because Edith Prentice was a close friend of mine. I knew her for many years, and I definitely know that day it did rain. She cried those tears. That moment for her said, for her saying, finally, it took all these years, but now we do need to commit, and we need to remind our elected officials we need the funding to make sure that everything is up to date, from elevators to ramps, new buses, as we already have one downstairs, and the updated accessoride to make it more colorful, more beautiful, and making sure as we get more new signs. We also like to thank the MTA also downstairs, that as you're aware, the accessory vehicles are down there now at the stop, but when we do not have meetings or events or any special things, we have a covert vehicle blocking the accessoride downstairs. I want to thank every MTA, Q, and your staff, Sarah Meyer, thank you. Thank you for getting rid of that covert thing, because it was blocking. It is not fair for any person with a walker, wheelchair, or any mobile disability, any kind of disability. We need to remind them that accessorized stops are for the accessorized customers, and that can be even a small car, medium MV1, or the large bus. We need to remind them that these vehicles have to get them on and off safety. As your local says, safety matters to us all. We need to continue doing that. And I want to wish everyone a happy ADA 32. This is a very big, going to be a great year to celebrate the ADA 32, to get more elevators to come in from now to the year 2055. So elected officials, if you're watching this and listening, put the funding in, please, for every elevator on every train line from Metro North, Long Island Railroad, and the subways. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Gian Paduala, followed by Miriam Fisher.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Padula, and I'm a supervisor with Educational Vision Services from the New York City Department of Education. I'm also a member of the Advisory Committee for Transit Accessibility. After being a teacher for 15 years, I decided to take a stab at administration to try to make a difference. And I've been on the job now for a little over 4 years. And whenever people ask me about the job, I like to joke around and say it's a whole bunch of meetings about meetings and not enough action. As administrators, we need to be able to innovate, communicate, but at the end of the day, we better execute. If we're not getting anything done, then what are we doing? We're just wasting people's time. Q, I'm so glad that you guys settled and there's an agreement in place to enhance accessibility throughout the system. Chris, thank you for extending phase 1 of the on-demand program. Please, let's work now together with ACTA and all the stakeholders to come up with a reasonable, viable, and sustainable phase 2. It's so easy to come up with reasons to say no, but it takes a true leader to figure out how to say yes and actually get stuff done. Disabled folks are not porcelain dolls going to and from doctor's offices. We have full and active lives. We have places to go, people to see, and things to do. Our time is just as valuable as anyone else's time. Enough is enough. Talk is cheap. Please, let's just get some stuff done. As President Davies said originally, let's get stuff done. Don't mistake disability for inability. Low expectations lead to low outcomes. My name is John Padula. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Miriam Fisher, followed by Rachel Foss.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Please go ahead.
Okay, I'm having trouble with my internet, so I may get bumped off. It's been happening. We celebrate last week's announcement of binding legal agreement on accessibility. I want to bring up some things that I don't hear a lot about. The Second Avenue subway, which is now in discussion. Multi-billion-dollar project, most expensive in subway history, could siphon money needed for accessibility for those with few options. Proposed light rail, not drilling tunnels, quicker, less disruptive, cheaper, no elevators needed for accessibility. Extend past 125th Street to unserved Bronx transit deserts, which I believe was part of one of the original plans. I've seen many. Light rail models in Europe and our neighbor, New Jersey. City Lab wrote recently, Europe, 200 to 500 million per mile, New York City, 3.9 billion. Possibly investigated for Second Avenue subway. Notice of non-working elevators. Applaud the new train announcements of location of next stations, front, center, near rear platform, but it is not accessible when not warned that elevator is out and can't plan ahead and change. Riders in wheelchairs are often stranded, sometimes for hours, sometimes need to be carried, missed connections, late for work. The last month I've been taking the 7 to Grand Central. This elevator has been out. Went on Twitter and got a reply from the MTA. Announcements are hardwired in the address system. We are sending this tweet to our communication team to
Please
see
conclude your
how
remarks.
we might adjust. Please follow up on that, and so that people
Please
are
conclude your
forewarned
remarks.
when elevators are out. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Rachel Foss, followed by Jason Anthony.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Foss, the Senior Research Analyst for reInvent Albany. Sorry for starting a little early there. We were having trouble hearing you. Today, reInvent Albany released a 2-year update on the $55 billion 2020-24 MTA capital plans funding and spending. Our report, Double Jeopardy, shows that the current plan is plagued by historically low spending and funding and has received only 7% of the funds budgeted. Delays to congestion pricing have jeopardized the MTA's ability to complete the 2020-24 capital plan and stalled delivery of $15 billion in funding the MTA is counting on to upgrade signals, make accessibility improvements, and purchase buses, subways, and commuter railroad cars. Additionally, COVID-19 slowed the MTA's capital spending and decimated its operating income. As of May 2022, the MTA has only 7% of the funds needed for the 2020 capital plan, or only $4 billion of the $55 billion budgeted. This is the slowest pace of the last two capital plans, which at 29 months in had 18% and 20% of the funds needed to complete them. The 2020-24 plan also lags in total dollars received 29 months in. We only have $3.9 billion for the current plan compared to $6.5 billion for the 2015 plan and $4.3 billion for the 2010 plan, both of which were much smaller at $33 billion and $24 billion respectively. We continue to strongly support congestion pricing. If the MTA is going to complete its 2020-24 capital program, it will need the money to do so. This requires the MTA speeding up its environmental assessment and being given the go-ahead from the Federal Highway Administrations to start congestion pricing without further delay. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Jason Anthony, followed by Bruce Hain.
Good morning, everyone. Jason Anthony from Amazon Labor Union. As you guys see this morning, I'm inside my work facility here in Staten Island. First and foremost, I want to address safety because I've been witnessing a couple of safety incidents inside the subway system. For example, at Methodist Point along the flushing line, I witnessed an individual that crossed the tracks from one side to the other in the end of last month. And on a positive note, I'm glad that the MTA settled with the people with disabilities, but this is not the day to be complacent. I strongly suggest those who are in the meeting today to attend the transit committee to be involved. And I'll see you guys next month in the committees. And I will strongly suggest President Rinaldi to add extra service on the LIRR on Huntington Avenue into the 4th of July Macy's celebration in Queens, and to and from Manhattan from Grand Central. So that's all I have for this month. I'll see you guys next month from MTA headquarters.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Bruce Hain, followed by Tremel Thompson.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for letting me speak to you again. This is called Regarding the Jamaica Station. The station is from the era of the highest achievements in the field of passenger railroading. It was brilliantly overbuilt, and the full train capacity, that is throughput, was never realized. Cross-platform transfers in both directions, a convenience for which the station was specifically designed, will be reduced to a bare minimum. They will be replaced by up and over transfers to a Brooklyn shuttle, having its eastern terminus at the new platform. Contrary to planners' assertions that the new platform increases throughput capacity, it does exactly the opposite. Between the new platform and the AirTrain terminal, the space occupied by the station's 2 through tracks has been compromised, and the through tracks are gone. Before the AirTrain, there was room for 3 through tracks. Every train must stop at Jamaica, and that's insanity, no relation to my state in your presence Monday. With no provision for through running, train capacity will be reduced to about 1/3. Before there were manifold provisions for expanding through train capacity. Now it has been castrated. And you intend to castrate the westbound leg as well, which will be needed for the Atlantic Avenue Tunnel to Manhattan. Whoever you are, You are giving MTA bad advice and thumbing your nose at your betters who brilliantly designed built that station. And you have betrayed your beneficiaries, the MTA and the City of New York. Dear board members and council, there's a dozen
Sir, your time has
provisions
elapsed.
in
Please conclude your remarks.
that address this stuff. You're on firm ground. Remove the platform
Sir,
and get paid for it. Thank you very much.
the next speaker is Tramel Thompson, who will be followed by Victoria Bugatti.
Everyone. So Jano, a couple of months ago, you came to a black community in a black church and told a whole bunch of white lies. You said that the NWBE of the MTA is doing a whole bunch of phenomenal things for the black women outside the job, but you failed to tell those same people what this company do to the black women on the job. No light duty work. You want them to work until they 9 months pregnant. You even had women lose their baby on this job. And you ain't say not one word about that. You have 4,326 black women in the affected titles and only 174 white women. Now, all women are created equal, but black women are highly affected by the policies of this company. Also, we had a rally in front of your home. Now, a lot of people ask, why you had a rally in front of his home? Because nobody in this room care until that problem is at their doorstep. And that's when you started to care, because we had a peaceful rally, no harassment, no vandalism. But guess what you did that you think that I don't know? You used the MTA police to go to the precinct the next day to protect yourself. Why you don't take that same action to protect workers? Thought I didn't know about that, right? And Kenny and Edward, I'm very surprised at you guys. You guys went to the precinct and told my HIPAA violation to those police officers. I never exposed my medical diagnosis to the public. Never. And Jano, we share the same precinct. That's my community. I do great things in my community. To send police officers that has nothing to do with MTA property, your home is not MTA property, to use them for your own personal benefit, to go expose my HIPAA rights to the precinct, that's a violation. And you know that. I normally do a casket in front of 2 Broadway. That casket will be in front of your home. We're going to bring all these safety issues back to your home.
Please conclude your remarks. The next speaker will be Victoria Bugatti, followed by Charlton D'Souza.
Good morning. I'm Vittorio Bugatti, leader and founder of the Express Bus Advocacy Group. I'm here today to discuss the Sim 6 and Sim 11 Express Bus stop located at Lexington Avenue and East 33rd Street. You see a photo in my background of that bus stop, which is overrun with garbage. A number of Express Bus commuters have reached out to myself and Felipe Drasafi, another Express Bus advocate that I work with, to see if this bus stop can be moved to a safer and cleaner location. We have been asking the MTA to move this bus stop for many, many months. Their response has been that they will look at it. So now I'm here today before the entire MTA board so that everyone can look at it. This bus stop is overrun with garbage. The rats, the summer stench, the filth, it's absolutely disgusting and appalling. On the other side of the mounds of garbage are 2 active parking garages where cars enter and exit all day long. There is nowhere to wait safely. Mr. Cipriano, Mr. Anacaro, Mr. Lieber, Mr. Davey, and Mrs. Mayor, your customers are demanding that action be taken immediately to move this bus stop, and we are proposing that Lexington Avenue and East 32nd Street be the new location. This simply requires a little time, a John Hancock on a form, and a submittal to the Department of Transportation, who will fulfill the request and move the stop to the aforementioned location. If you want to know why your customers aren't coming back, this is an example of why, and you should be aggressively pushing to fix these issues. I'm happy to attend each month to advocate for my fellow Express Bus commuters until they get a cleaner and safer location to wait for the bus. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Charlton D'Souza, followed by Jean Ryan.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlton D'Souza, president of Passengers United.
And yet again, we have a crisis going on in the subway. At 77th Street, people were on a 6 train, and an off-duty police officer had to pull out his weapon, on the train because there was an individual EDP, behaving erratically. This is why people on the subways are fed up. We're fed up of dealing with all of this stuff. And we're going to start to see a lot of these vigilante incidents in the subway if the situation is not gotten under control. The MT board has known about this, the NYPD, the MT police, but no one seems to be doing anything. At 34th Street, Herald Square, a lady fainted. We had to wait almost 40 minutes for EMS and for the police to show up. And, it's ridiculous. We're not getting the support. Nobody cares at night about the overnight passengers. We're just left at our own mercy. It's not right. And I just want all of you on the board and New York City Transit to know that tomorrow, Thursday at 7:30 p.m., Passengers United is having a Queens Bus Redesign meeting. I hope all of you will come out and show your support. And like Vitalio said, with all many of these bus stops, there's garbage all over the place. You'll need to survey these bus stops, and you'll need to make sure that the bus stops are clear, because that's a clear ADA violation. The bus stop has to be clear so that a wheelchair can board. So these are things that have to be taken into consideration. And also with the Long Island Railroad cross honoring starting on Friday night into Saturday, please make sure you're making announcements about the J train outage, on the buses and on the MT bus time app. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Jean Ryan, who will be followed by Alexander Kempt.
Good morning. I'm Jean Ryan, President of Disabled in Action of Metropolitan New York. Congratulations to the MTA, our lawyers, disability rights advocates, and Shepard Mullen, and all the plaintiffs for legally agreeing that the MTA will fund and build elevators in 95% of the stations by 2055. We hope that sometime along all those years, engineers will figure out how to do 100% of the stations, and that the MTA will build those elevators. But with elevators, we need working elevators. We cannot keep on getting stranded by the ones that exist. One non-working elevator is not just an inconvenience for many people with mobility disabilities, especially wheelchair and scooter users. It's a crisis. All elevators need to be in good working order, even the privately owned subway elevators like the ones at Columbus Circle and Barclays. We need robust, accurate, and professional notification of elevator outages and of alternate accessible paths, not just finding out when we get there, not seeing a scrawled handwritten note taped up. If it takes training and hiring more MTA elevator workers and paying more to retain them, you need to do that. Lastly, what about evacuation procedures when people get stranded because of non-working elevators? What do we do? Who do we notify? What if we forgot our cell phones or out of battery power that day? People need to know this information. Riders with disabilities and their families and friends and bosses need to know. There should be PSA announcements on trains and stations and on the website as well as in the media. It should not be a secret within the MTA. People don't want to ride an unreliable system that has few elevators if they don't know how they can escape in an emergency and how they can get where they need to go. You might think that this information will scare riders and turn them away, but they're already turned away for the most part. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Alexander Kempt, who will be followed by Jackie Cohen.
Good morning. My name is Alexander Kemp. I am a elected officer for the union in the Brooklyn Division, TA Surface. I hope everybody is well and happy summer. We have a mantra in our division that speaks to how we are treated and how we're respected. That mantra is essential means expendable. A few weeks ago, there was a bus operator who was stabbed and slashed across his eye. That bus operator is out of East New York Bus Depot. There is no sense of urgency to catch this person's assailant or assailants. There has been no information, no updates, and no rally from this board or from anybody at 2 Broadway to address the seriousness of how catastrophic, that it could have been. We also had another bus operator who exited his bus and had 3 people jump out of a car, pull a gun on him, and rob him in the middle of the day with no sense of urgency, which highlights our mantra that essential ultimately means expendable. The reality is that Mr. Lieber, a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, did a press conference across the street by the escalator and highlighted that he was in the bus buying business. There are electric buses being provided to the system, but none of these buses have been commenced to have full enclosures. This has been a conversation for over a decade, but yet assaults and violent attacks on bus operators continue. Yet there is no sense of urgency from here to expedite the process and put us in full enclosures. I hope that the mantra of essential being expendable no longer has to be part of our reality and becomes one of yours. I want to donate the last bit of my time to Tramell Thompson.
Jano, we need to fix the underutilized employees in this MTA.
Please conclude your
Blacks,
remarks.
females, and women are not.
Please conclude your remarks. Our next speaker is Jackie Cohen, who will be followed by Andy Pollock.
Hi. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jackie Cohen, and I am the Director of Climate and Equity Policy at Tri-State Transportation Campaign. Tri-State is a member of the Bus Turnaround Coalition, a diverse group of New Yorkers, including my colleagues who are here today from the Riders Alliance, Transit Center, and the Knightbrook Strap Hangers campaign, dedicated to advocating for bus service improvements that will bring more New Yorkers onto the bus and improve the lives of those who already depend on bus service each day. We applaud the MTA for the launch of the Bronx Bus Network redesign and are excited for the restart of the Queens Network redesign process. We see it as an opportunity to pursue bold changes while clearly communicating the plan's benefits to riders. Better bus service has become an existential imperative for our city as we grapple with worsening traffic congestion and seek to mitigate climate change. With ambitious route changes and an increased investment in service frequency, the MTA can address deeply rooted inequities like racial access to opportunity gap in New York. The next round of network redesign should set clear goals and measure success based on whether new bus service patterns deliver such benefits. Our coalition has developed 5 key recommendations for this agency to adopt in order to ensure our shared goal of a successful Queens Bus Network redesign. These recommendations include providing riders with more frequent service, particularly on high ridership routes, implementing all-door boarding on all local buses, measuring equity and investment, and improving community outreach and engagement. By implementing these recommendations, we believe the MTA will deliver a successful redesign in all boroughs, and you will hear now from my fellow colleagues from the Bus Turnaround Coalition who will outline these recommendations in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Andy Pollock, followed by Gary Giordano.
Let's talk about the Queens Bus redesign. So number 1, the Q30 bus route. Why are you guys threatening to eliminate it? It doesn't make any sense considering that this is an essential route that runs between Jamaica and Queensboro Community College. Also, there are medical offices in Little Neck along with a shopping plaza and of course the supermarket on Horace Harding Boulevard, North Shore. You guys are basically going to make it very inconvenient for people to get where they need to go. This also includes the Q88. Why are you guys basically making the Q88 start at Horace Harding and Little Neck Parkway and run all the way to Queens Center Mall? How in the world does that make any sense when the current Q88 route is efficient? It runs very well between Queens Village and Elmhurst. So basically, if you guys are taking away the Q88, I'm going to have no option to come from Fresh Meadows to use the Hempstead branch to get east. Also, it's been brought to my attention that express buses are going to be running less frequently on the off-peak midday afternoons on weekdays. That is completely unacceptable for a transit district like Northeast Queens, especially on the QM5 and the QM6. I do want to make one point. Westbound on the Q46, there is a bus stop, Union Turnpike and 224th Street. I am immediately calling on New York City Department of Transportation Commissioner Ydanis Rodriguez to immediately remove that bus stop because The next block is Springfield Boulevard. Why is the bus stop close enough when you could just literally go around the corner and just catch the 46 westbound to Kew Gardens? How does that make any sense? And especially because it's confused so many passengers over the years. So I'm going to conclude my remarks. My name is Andy Pollock. I'm from Passengers United. Have a good, safe 4th of July, and I expect to speak to you all again next month.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Gary Giordano, who will be followed by Jaleese Race.
Good morning. Dear Chairman Lieber and President Rinaldi, board members, and agency heads. My name is Gary Giordano, and I am a board member of Civics United for Railroad Environmental Solutions. I'm also the district manager of Queens Community Board 5. We have a problem in our community with the polluting freight rail locomotives, and the state legislature has allocated $25 million to replace those polluting freight rail locomotives, which are operated by the concessionaire for the LIRR and the MTA, New York and Atlantic Railway. $20 million of this funding is still available, but is stalled in a contract, MTA RFP 6263, where the allocation is supposed to be for the least polluting Tier 4 locomotives. The locomotives that are being operated are from the 1970s and are polluting our communities. We have Ridgewood, Glendale, Maspeth, Middle Village, and it's spreading to other communities. We're asking that you please take away or to give our taxpayers a break, please act responsibly and withdraw your 2018 MTA RFP 6263 for brand new misapplied line haul locomotives, which will not help the situation very much, and issue a straightforward Tier 4 switcher repower RFP for switcher locomotives with the funding that is available and has been available for years. I implore you, please issue a new RFP.
Please conclude your remarks.
For our communities.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Jolie's Race, who will be followed by Nolani Fishman.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jolise Race. I am the senior organizer at Riders Alliance, a grassroots organization that fights for more reliable, affordable, and accessible public transportation in New York City. I'm here today to speak to you all about the Queens Bus Network redesign and the importance of more frequent bus service. Together, advocates and riders have looked at the plan and support the potential it has to speed up buses for riders in Queens. And while I appreciate the increase in frequency on many routes, it is not enough to truly change the lives of bus riders, who are mostly working class people and essential workers that use buses every day to keep the city functioning properly. They keep the economy going, serving people food, healing people at hospitals, and so much more. They rely on the bus to pick up their children from school and then take them home to cook them dinner. What bus riders in Queens need is 6-minute service, ensuring that they can navigate their lives and all that they do for their family and community without having to spend unnecessary and precious time waiting for an unreliable bus. I would like to share the experience of Atonia, a Queens bus rider. I live in Springfield Gardens, and as an essential worker, I take the Q22, Q77, Q85, and Q114. They are some of the most unreliable buses I have ever used, with wait times as long as 30 minutes. For my commute, I need to take either the Q77 or the Q85 to downtown, then take the Q114 or Q22, taking about an hour and 15 minutes. The long journey and wait times result in me missing my children's pickup time from school and regular lateness to work. With service that is as frequent as every 6 minutes, bus riders like Atonia would be able to get to work on time without the fear of showing up late or potentially losing their job. They would have the peace of mind that they will be able to pick their children up on time. 6-minute service would truly transform what it means to be a bus rider in Queens, and I encourage the MTA to make it happen for those who need it most.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nolani Fishman, who will be followed by Naomi Jones.
My name is Nolani Fishman. I'm a resident in Astoria, Queens, moving from Brooklyn, and a member of the NYPIRG Strap Hangers campaign. I am here to talk about the Queens Bus Network redesign. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this redesign. When I'm waiting on a bus in Queens, it is very uncertain if it will arrive on time, and if by the time it does, if I will be able to fit in because it has become so packed. This is frustrating, and while I love my new neighborhood, I do not love the baggage that comes with it. I've waited upwards of 40 minutes for a bus, and when my friends would ask why I would use the buses, I always jokingly respond, it is part of the New York experience. And to be quite honest, it is part of the New York experience. And to be working New Yorkers, commuters, essential workers, and students are the main users of buses. Poor service has become part of the New York transit experience, but it shouldn't be. A resident should be able to rely on their transit system. The redesign's plan for stop rebalancing means that more people will board the bus at each stop. Riders don't want that to mean even more delays. The solution is all-door boarding. With Omni, this is accessible, fast, and easy. 4 years ago, MTA officials promised its riders and drivers that all-door boarding would happen, but they have yet to make it a reality. For bus stop rebalancing to achieve its full efficiency, potential, and speed, every bus trip, riders must not be backed up to enter through just one door. That's why I'm speaking here today, because I want a bus service that I can rely on to be efficient and on time. I urge the MTA board to take this message back. Make our public transit system reliable, accessible, and timely for all New Yorkers by implementing all-door boarding on buses. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Naomi Jones, who will be followed by Jason Rabinowitz.
On June 20th, a complaint was replaced or reported to TLC via 311 after an accessoride trip resulted in a third-party contractor endangering my life by backing up his vehicle while I was trying to get his information. This came after the entire ride of racial slurs. I am a DV survivor and a trauma survivor, and being in that type of situation was horrific. Not to mention just being called nigger multiple times is more than any New Yorker should have to deal with. The incident number was 311-10733-291. As the chairwoman for the Disabilities Committee of the National Action Network, I hear complaints and do advocacy for people living with disabilities all the time. And unfortunately, I can give my own lived experience, but this is horrific and it has to stop. MTA should hold contracted brokers accountable for the accurate and safe transport of the disabilities passengers that utilize accessories. MTA should not contract with brokers that continuously are in violation of TLC and MTA standards and or use third-party contractors that do not respect or meet the needs of the disabled population. There needs to be an accessoride point system for brokers and drivers that compromise the health and safety of people. It's not okay, it's illegal, and something has to be done expeditiously. There needs to be repercussions immediately.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Jason Rabinowitz, who will be followed by Erica Montoya. Mr. Rabinowitz?
Okay, not seeing the timer, but I'll start. Thank you, members of the board, for hearing me out today. I'd like to talk about the proposed Long Island Railroad schedule in anticipation of the East Side Access opening. After decades of work and something like $12 billion spent, the biggest change in LIRR schedules in my lifetime is upon us. But simply, it's problematic. If you're not going to Manhattan, it's really problematic. Travel times for nearly all riders will increase across the board, sometimes quite dramatically. But now we're seeing that Brooklyn riders are being shouldered with an unreasonable increase in travel times. When I visit family on the Far Rockaway branch today, the trip from Atlantic Terminal is a single train, 37-minute ride. It's great. But the proposed schedule increases that to 1 hour and 2 minutes, 62 minutes. That's something like a 60% increase in travel time. Nearly all Brooklyn riders must now take a shuttle train to Jamaica, traverse multiple stairways that represent an unnecessary accessibility issue, and then connect to another train that still only runs once an hour and now has no timed connections. One extra shuttle train per hour on weekends to Atlantic Terminal doesn't benefit riders if it doesn't actually connect to anything. This trip and many others is now longer by transit than it is by driving, a crucial decision factor in getting people to take the train instead of driving, something extremely important these days. Many of the trains I typically take today now arrive just 1 minute after a scheduled train to Brooklyn departs, meaning these riders will now have to wait 15, 20, or 25 minutes at Jamaica to continue their journeys to or from Brooklyn. Why is this happening? Because apparently Long Island Railroad didn't order enough trains to operate more frequent service to Brooklyn. The M9A order is still missing in action. You can't run the Atlantic branch like a subway if service is only 20 minutes, unless the R train is your model of choice. I urge the board to have Long Island Railroad revise the proposed schedules and release a schedule that does not punish Brooklyn riders at the expense of those now going to Manhattan. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Erica Montoya, who will be followed by Eva Farkas.
Good morning. Before I start, I want to say thank you for my great ride on the QM11 this morning. My name is Erica Montoya. I'm a Queens native and a lifelong transit rider, trekking on the Q72, Q38, Q29, and Q60 since childhood, and I am now navigating those same bus lines with my 2 kids and stroller in tow. So I'm very much invested in the success of the Queens Bus Redesign Plan. I firmly believe that this success is dependent on the outreach and true engagement efforts that the MTA needs to undertake with those transit riders that depend on this public service. Many of those riders that were talked about by some of my colleagues when talking about the essential workers, those who are serving New York City. I want to underscore the ask of our joint Better Bus Coalition letter to improve community outreach. The MTA should create simple and digestible information for riders in multiple languages and using multiple mediums, videos, infographics, to better explain the benefits and changes the redesign will bring to riders and to solicit feedback. This should include providing accessible documents and making interpretation available at open houses and workshops. The agency should also do everything possible to make it easy for riders with limited mobility or access to technology, or those requiring child care services, to engage in the redesign process. This includes holding specific sessions for riders at senior centers or assisted living facilities. I believe that the MTA can do better, and it must. More than performative outreach, it must truly engage riders in the process. Your outreach efforts are at best a posting of information and weak invitations to Zoom. True engagement requires intentionality, and that intentionality must be driven by desired outcomes of impact. Language interpretation alone is not engagement. MTA must meet people where they're at. There must be in-person events with interpretation available. MTA should be going to busy transit centers and surveying folks. Throughout the pandemic, we used public campaigns to provide critical information through social media, through ads. We must do the same. The MTA has an opportunity to provide the quality service our city deserves. Don't waste it. Thank you for your time. And also, next time, when trying to engage folks, don't have a hearing after an election day.
Conclude your remarks. Thank you. Our final speaker will be Eva Farkas.
Hello, my name is Eva Farkas, and I am here representing Transit Center. As the Queens Bus Network redesign approaches, we'd like to reiterate the importance of the MTA adopting a strong equity-based framework to guide service planning decisions. Redesigns are an opportunity to reduce racial inequality by improving the rider experience and increasing access to opportunities for people of color, women, immigrants, people with disabilities, and low-income communities. Unfortunately, deep inequality exists in our system. Last year, Transit Center released our Transit Equity Dashboard. It shows yawning disparities in what people can reach using public transportation. White residents have access to more jobs than people of any other race or ethnicity within 45 minutes. Black residents have access to the least, just over half the access that white residents do. The MTA has an ability and responsibility to address this, but it doesn't currently measure the success of its projects based on whether they help close these gaps or improve life for disadvantaged New Yorkers. The MTA has an opportunity to do better with the Queens redesign by analyzing the equity impacts and making them public. Examples of equitable considerations include working with DOT to ensure that street safety improvements and amenities like shelters and benches are placed at stops that remain after stop balancing. All-door boarding can also reduce crowding and make trips faster and more reliable, providing a more dignified trip for riders. Likewise, sharing how much is being invested in the redesign and where will allow riders to understand whether frequency improvements are being delivered to the most impacted communities. These elements should be coupled with more traditional equity metrics like isochrones that show how many more places riders can access in a given period of time. These metrics can be shared on a dashboard similar to the one the MTA already makes public for bus
conclude your
speeds.
remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Lieber, this concludes the public comment session.
Can we make a comment regarding all of these people that spoke?
I'm usually to make remarks, but go ahead, please.
Okay. I've been a long-standing member of the board, and we hear all these people over and over every month. I request, Mr. Chairman, that we be updated on the corrections and what you have done to try and help these individuals. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this month's meeting of the MTA board. Before we get started, I need to welcome our new board members to this group. Lisa Soren, Lisa, the president of the Bronx Chamber of Commerce, a new member. Sharif Solomon, director of the Mayor's Office of Policy and Planning. Sharif. Midori Valdivia, welcome back. Former MTA chief of staff, now COO of Quorum New York Leadership Center. And Frank Miranda, welcome. Frank is the president and CEO of the Hispanic Federation. Sammy Chu, who's joining us remotely, is chairman of the U.S. Green Building Council, Long Island chapter, and he's chief executive of an electrical contracting company, Edgewise Energy. And Sammy's been asked to serve as the Long Island representative, co-chair of the Railroad Committee. And Blanca Lopez, fellow of the New York Immigration and Social Justice Institute's Immigrant Advocacy Fellowship Program. We're so thrilled that the Senate was able to confirm. It was the perils of Pauline at the end of session, but we're so glad that that the Senate was able to confirm all of you. Congratulations also are due to Andrew Albert for having a milestone of 20 years of service on the MTA board.
An honor and a privilege.
And so that's 20 years, and I did the math, and that means there's over 1,500 minutes that you have corrected. But seriously, Andrew is...
It's about to be 1501.
Yeah. Andrew, we also appreciate the both the consistency and the depth of your knowledge that you bring to everything, to all our deliberations. I also want to welcome the new chief of the MTA PD, John Mueller, who comes to us from the Yonkers Police Department. John Mueller is, we're excited to bring him on board because in large part, Yonkers is the second largest city in the MTA region, and Chief Mueller understands many of the same issues. He's had a lot of experience in the Metro North system, and obviously Yonkers, with its proximity and similarity to the city, gives us a lot of background. And he's got incredible experience in developing police operations and a real track record of effectuating positive change with all the communities in Yonkers. So I want to welcome Chief Mueller to our team. Chief, I don't see him in the audience, but he's among us somewhere, right? I'm excited to work with all the new additions to our team and to deal with the big issues head on. One of the most significant challenges, and I am supposed to change my screen, right? There we go. One of the most significant challenges the MTA has struggled with for over decades, and you heard it from many of our speakers from the podium today, is how to make our 117-year-old subway system fully accessible in accordance with the ADA. Until the 2020 to 2024 capital program, progress was slow, but not anymore. As you heard last week, we're taking the next great leap towards universal accessibility. We signed a legal agreement that commits to maintaining an aggressive level of investment in future MTA capital programs until at least 95% of stations are outfitted with elevators or ramps. And as Gene Ryan of the DIA said, I mean, the hope is that by the time we reach that milestone, that engineering expertise has developed enough so that we can get that last 5% of stations now deemed infeasible done as well. This is a commitment of many, many billions of dollars, and it's going to shape future MTA capital programs, make no mistake. So we need to, go into this, we need to celebrate it, but also recognize that we are binding future MTA boards, we're binding the legislature and future governors to some degree to make this a priority forevermore until accessibility is achieved to that extremely high level. MTA Chief Accessibility Officer Quorum Arroyo and Deputy Chief Development Officer Tim Mulligan, who are the two of the officials who negotiated this out and worked through all the issues, are going to give you a more detailed briefing a little later. But I want to acknowledge also, and I'm serious about this, the disability advocacy community. All of us who've been sitting here in these meetings have heard from them for many years. They have brought their passion to the podium and to the discussions of this issue. They have been our conscience on this issue, and now they're our partners and in the implementation phase. And I just think that that's an amazing milestone to celebrate, and we hope we make good on that partnership as we go forward with the disability community. We're eager to hit the ground running and make sure that New Yorkers never again have to contort their travel plans or, God forbid, to skip a fun event because a subway station isn't ADA accessible. Another big issue that the MTA is taking on with strong support from Governor Hochul is congestion pricing. We'll never be able to achieve our climate or air quality goals or truly prioritize street space for the types of vehicles that we must have, like buses, police, fire, and sanitation vehicles, and paratransit, until we have a system that disincentivizes private single occupancy vehicles from clogging up the central business district. Congestion pricing is the answer to that challenge. Now, everyone knows that for the last few months, we've been working to get our environmental assessment back on track so that we can move in 2023 to implementation. The good news, and this is news, is that we have been able to address virtually all of the questions and data requests thrown at us by our federal partners. And last week, big milestone, we resubmitted the draft environmental assessment to Federal Highways, the U.S. DOT agency that has jurisdiction over our environmental review. So it is that everybody knows that that process was taking some time. We hit the milestone. It's back at Federal Highways. They have to review it. But once that review is complete, we will be putting it out to the public for the public's review and for additional outreach. In the end, we have stanched the loss of time on this congestion pricing process, and we're hoping that we lost no more than 4 to 6 weeks as a result of some of the difficulties in answering all those data requests and questions. So I want to thank Governor Hochul, who's been steadfast in her support and helped us with the federal partners to accomplish this goal. It is really a big milestone, so we're pushing on. Bus ridership. We heard a lot about bus ridership today. Last month, we shared with you the analysis that was done by our operations planning group about how subway ridership was recovering station by station. What we found was that the parts of the system that were still lagging were largely in the CBDs, in Manhattan and our satellite business districts in downtown Brooklyn and Long Island City. Here you see there is a similar pattern in the bus area. Manhattan below 96th Street, downtown Brooklyn, and very western Queens are still below 65% ridership compared to pre-COVID. And more affluent neighborhoods, some more affluent neighborhoods in eastern Queens, in Brooklyn, in Staten Island, places that have high concentration of white-collar remote workers are also down as well. But compare it to this map. The areas in green are the neighborhoods where ridership is much closer to what it was pre-COVID. These are communities of essential workers, working class New Yorkers who depend on the bus every day. In fact, there are a number of neighborhoods in eastern Queens and the Rockaways that are consistently more than 90% of pre-pandemic ridership. And look at Upper Manhattan and the Bronx. In these neighborhoods, our ability to deliver full service and fast and reliable service is absolutely essential, which is why we are investing so much energy in the Bronx Bus Redesign. We briefed you on it last month. It's off to a strong start after launching last Sunday. Remember, this was we talked a lot today about the Queens Bus Redesign, but the Bronx, we actually made some adjustments and we got consensus among the elected community and other leaders, and now we're in the implementation phase. It has been 100 years since anyone really redesigned our bus system, and now we're getting it done, redrawing the map borough by borough. As we always say, first Staten Island, now the Bronx, next Queens, and not long after, we're going to attack Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Bus Redesign as well. We have a robust outreach effort underway with MTA customer ambassadors handing out pamphlets, standing at bus stops, doing person-to-person outreach. There were several hundred MTA volunteers who signed up to do this duty, folks who, most of whom normally work at 2 Broadway, who signed up and shipped up to the Bronx and actually did that ambassador work. I was out there for a while last Friday myself on the BX36 route, which is moving from slow side streets, mostly along 180th, to East Tremont. It's technically East Tremont Avenue. Everyone calls it Tremont, and straightened out that route. And the idea is that may help, and that's intended to help make a much faster trip. But I want to show you a short video that our social team put together on the rollout. Cue the video, please.
People want to get to their destination safely. They want it to be efficient services, reliable, and affordable. If you check all of those boxes, you will have Bronx happy commuters in our borough.
The MTA has been redesigning bus routes in every borough to be streamlined, more reliable, and provide better service. It's a multi-year effort to make buses better across New York City.
Buses are so crucial in the Bronx. They're such an important part of how people get around. But the old routes didn't reflect what today's riders need.
This is a working class community that on an average day, there's never not a line for the bus. We line up here.
This has been an effort across the entire borough to get the changes that we truly need for better buses.
We had a few goals in mind when we started redesigning these routes. We wanted to give people better, more reliable service with more useful connections and less time sitting in traffic.
In the Bronx, we streamlined several routes to make them more direct with fewer turns, and that means we'll be able to run more frequent service on a lot of these lines.
We're extending lines into neighborhoods like Parkchester, Highbridge, West Farms, and Co-op City. And there are new connections to the subway, like the ADA accessible station at East 180th Street.
Any trip that only costs one fare on the old routes, it still only costs you one fare on the new routes, even if you have to transfer.
We're working with our partners in the New York City DOT to create more bus lanes and busways on city streets so riders get better service and sit in less traffic.
We made sure to look at bus stops that were close to other bus stops and had the lowest ridership. So we were inconveniencing customers as little as possible and the fewest number of customers.
In New York, we have a lot of bus stops, and they're closer together than they are in other bus systems around the country.
When you're making every stop, it slows down service for everybody.
Current distance between stops in New York is about 805 feet. This redesign brings the average distance in the Bronx to 1,100 feet.
We wanted to make sure to keep stops that are used by a lot of our riders, connect to other lines, and that are important to your community.
Each stop we removed saves about 20 seconds in travel time, so even if you have to walk a little farther to your stop, the benefit is faster buses and more reliable service for everyone.
The redesign of the bus network will impact me by making my trip shorter and direct. I would not be taking 2 buses to get to the train.
The Bronx is the second borough to get redesigned bus routes, and the lessons the MTA learns here will carry forward in other boroughs.
I think this new plan that ultimately is the final plan is a much better plan, but it is because of the community's input. And there's nothing greater than the MTA and New York City Transit working with bus riders here in the Bronx. And the idea of engaging with residents at a local level in a real tangible way is something that will prove beneficial, not just for commuters and our borough, but also for the agency as well.
Just a point of emphasis that redesigned routes can only do so much without more bus lanes and more camera enforcement. And so this month, earlier this month, I participated in a bus-oriented transit summit with Mayor Adams and members of his team. Sharif, you were there, to announce the first 20 miles of the mayor's promised 150 miles of new bus lanes. Just let me emphasize this. In the last administration, we were able to increase the commitment to bus lanes, and we had an event. Craig was with me with prior DOT Commissioner Hank Gutman, and that was a commitment to 20 miles a year. Now we're talking about 150 miles in 4 years. So the mayor has really upped the goal, and that's an incredible commitment from City Hall, and we're working very, very closely together. We're seeing the same type of strong partnership from the state on transforming Penn Station, which is perhaps our biggest challenge on the Capitol side as of late. On Friday, I testified before the State Senate about the importance of fixing Penn now. This was Governor Hochul's major statement, which is she came in and the plan was that existing Penn would be fixed in the same time frame or after the expansion and the tunnels from New Jersey and so on, and that was 15 years. Governor Hochul said, no, we need to fix Penn now in the window that exists between the opening of East Side Access, when a lot of Long Island Railroad commuters are going to go to Grand Central, and when Penn Access, the Metro North project, allows Metro North commuters to come into Penn. So this is an incredibly powerful commitment. And we had an event with Governor Hochul a couple weeks ago at Moynihan Train Hall where we announced the issuance of an RFP for the design. You all have seen some of the concepts and some of the renderings, but now we're moving into real design, which leads directly into construction. And we're going to keep sorting through the submissions for that design project this summer, and we're hoping to have, Jamie's going to manage that, but we're going to have a recommendation for which team to select in the early fall, we hope, right, Jamie? Fixing Penn is a regional issue, and I just want to emphasize when this announcement was made and with the State Senate hearing, we got a lot of important, letters from key officials, including Suffolk County Executive Steve Ballone, Bronx Borough President Vanessa Gibson, who you saw in the video just now, and Queens Beep Donovan Richards. They made the important point that their residents use Penn and want it fixed. It's not only, the boroughs are also part of the story. We also heard from Congressman Richie Torres on the issue. He's passionate about Penn access and wants to make sure that Penn Station is ready to accept those East Bronx customers when that project is done. A topic that we had discussion about over a long period of time in this board. We continue to work closely with our state and city partners on all matters related to COVID, but last week, the New York City Health Department downgraded the COVID-19 alert level to medium in coordination with the State Health Department. As we move into this last phase of the pandemic, hopefully, the MTA has suspended its Vaxxer test program for its employees. I want to thank our workforce and our labor partners for the cooperation that we had through this very difficult phase. The MTA program was one of the most successful and effective of its kind in the country. Pat, Warren, you led it, and a huge pat on the back and attaboy to you and your team. We were facilitating testing for workers long before the requirement for Vaxxer tests, but we ramped things up. Take you through the numbers. Our team established 700 testing sites, 700. across all the operating agencies and performed approximately 500,000 tests. At the peak of Omicron, we were doing 24,000 tests a week. And altogether, we identified 25,000 cases of COVID. I just want to point out that our positivity rate, as a result in part of this effort, was well below the rest of the city and the state throughout the effort. Back in December, when Omicron emerged, we were at about 0.5% positivity when the city was 4 or 5 times as high. The management of this Vaxxer test program was incredibly successful in keeping our workforce safe, and it also allowed us to maintain the service delivery and not to have additional staff shortage problems because we had great partnership with the union. So our unions, plural. I want to just thank everybody for this Herculean accomplishment. Lastly, finances. We're seeing signs of progress on ridership, especially on the commuter railroads, which both hit new records on June 14th. But the big picture remains concerning. We're an $18 billion business that has lost 40% of our customers, and it has blown a massive hole in our operating budget. I don't want to get ahead of my colleague, Mr. Willen's July financial plan, but there is a possibility that our deficit may expand from what we've been working with in our previous plans because of updated projections. We're still waiting for those projections to be finalized, but we all know they're going to be lower than those 2020 estimates that we have been relying on. The severity of the situation underscores the need to reconsider, big issue, reconsider the way we fund mass transit in New York. I've been talking about this a lot lately. The MTA is an essential service, just like police, fire, and sanitation. It should be funded in a way that recognizes this fact. I'm eager to start these conversations in Albany over time, and especially once the legislature is back in session. Yeah, well, that's... all right. I can promise I'm not going to let this go. I know this board won't let it go. Under Governor Hochul, the MTA is not kicking the can on tough issues. We've just gone through 4 or 5 of them. And I hope we're showing by now, with our work on congestion pricing, redesigning the bus network, making the subway system fully ADA accessible, and the urgency of Penn station rebuilding, that we are taking on the tough issues. By working together, I believe we can do big things and create the system that New Yorkers deserve. So with that, let me move us on to the next presentation. At this point, in sort of normal order, I would invite comments or questions prompted by my presentation before we move on to the specials. Anybody? Mr. Zuckerman.
If you don't mind, this may make you blush a drop, but look, I think the hallmark of your tenure so far has been transparency and community input. I'd say that's a fair statement after the last period of time. And I am struck and frankly upset by the fact that we heard earlier that members of the public are coming to your home. I'm serious. We are public servants, everyone around this table, but one's private life stays private. And I just want to say that I'm sorry that happened to you, and I hope members of the public will realize that that's crossing a line that just shouldn't be crossed. So for your own safety and frankly for your own family's comfort, I just want to make that statement. So thank you for what you're doing, but there is a line and it was crossed from what I understand. So thank you, Jano.
It was not me, but my neighbors you should probably talk to. Other comments or questions?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, when we talked about ridership on Long Island, and of course the Long Island Railroad, I make a comment to you, and I would like you to look at it closely. Number one is that maybe we should have a new president of Long Island Railroad that we can answer to. Not that Kathy has done an insufficient job. She's done a wonderful job. But I think Long Island deserves to come back to have a president. That's number one. Number two, I think the MTA police, under our new chief, God bless him, we need more members of the force. As you could see by the presentation, the more riders that we're going to have, we want to encourage them. Safety is the most important thing, and we want to keep all our Long Island, as well as New York City Transit, and all the riders, the buses and all, safe. But the MTA Police Department is crucial for Long Island, and we must, and again, Metro North as well, we must have more recruitment and have more MOF, members of the force, so that crime doesn't escalate, as we've seen on the committee meeting. So I recommend, Mr. Chair, that you look into that, as well as what I said before, keeping us all abreast in regarding all of the complaints that all the speakers have had. Thank you.
Anybody else? Dori Valdivia.
Chair, I think I just want to applaud everyone, especially the bus operators this week who, launched the Bronx Bus Redesign. I think that's really exciting, especially because I know it's been a multi-year effort across the board. I think, I'm curious as to what might change, if anything, around community engagement for Queens, given some of the comments we've heard. But I do think that there's been a lot of great, the fundamentals and the foundations are down based on the incredible reception of Staten Island, and then we'll see kind of how the Bronx is going. So I'm excited to learn more about the data around performance and how it's going and what feedback we're getting from the operators.
Yeah, there was been a series, we're dealing with the sort of disconnect of our switchover in board membership, but there was a presentation on what was being done with the Queens Bus Redesign in terms of outreach. We should renew that presentation for new board members, just so you have the full benefit of all of that.
Thank you.
Great. Other folks, anybody? Mr. Poor.
Yes, so thank you. I just want to underline what you said before. My biggest concern, what keeps me up at night, is the financial situation that we face with this MTA. And I like the idea that you're going to be looking at outside the box for different kinds of funding. I feel like we're on the Titanic, only we know the iceberg's there. So we've got to address that issue, that financial iceberg. And I think we have to think very creatively about what other kinds of revenues we can bring to provide this service, other than what we usually have done. Thank you.
Point taken. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Great. Thank you. As you know, last week we announced the historic ADA settlement. Deputy Chief Development Officer Tim Mulligan and Chief Accessibility Officer Q Arroyo are here to present highlights and describe that exact arrangement. Q, Tim.
Thank you, Jano. So as we've heard before, and we all know, accessibility is one of our core values here at the MTA. It is also the biggest challenge the MTA has struggled with for the last decades: how to make our 117-year-old subway system fully accessible. We know that accessibility is crucial for a lot of New Yorkers and visitors, but especially the 1 million New Yorkers with disabilities and the over 1.5 million New Yorkers over the age of 65, parents and caregivers with strollers, for whom not being able to access a station makes it nearly impossible to get to jobs, schools, healthcare appointments, entertainment, and all the other opportunities that our city has to offer. But that is changing, and we are closing those gaps of inequalities. You may have seen in the news last week that the MTA and disability advocates reached an unprecedented agreement to make at least 95% of the subway system accessible. And that's happening in my lifetime. This means that New Yorkers will have greater access to independence to move around our city in their own time and when they want. Seniors can forget about having to move to Florida or the Carolinas, as they can age in place in the communities that they help build and with those that they love. This is huge. No other transit agency in the country has ever made this sort of commitment, both in terms of tens of billions of dollars and the number of stations, to which we're committing to make 344 stations accessible over the next 30 years. With this agreement, we are not only resolving the 5 years backlog of litigation between the MTA and the disability advocates, but we are also building a partnership to build a truly universal accessible system together, including our ACTA members and other members of the disability community, from whom we rely on from their partnership and engagement to reimagine and redesign the transit system that we all need and want. You may have heard the term 100 key stations, the first tranche of high traffic and or geographically central stations on the subway systems to be made accessible. Well, it took the MTA more than 3 decades to build those 100 stations. In the last few years, we have drastically accelerated the pace of these projects here at the MTA, in large part thanks to the 2020-2024 capital plan, which dedicates a record $5.2 billion for accessibility projects. And no prior capital plan had ever included more than $1.7 billion for accessibility. Since the beginning of 2020, we've added 15 new ADA accessible stations to our network, despite COVID, and contracts for another 23 stations have been awarded in the last 2 years. 13 more stations are planned to be awarded before this year's out. This is historic, and we're committed to continuing this level of investment and retrofits throughout our system. I'll turn it over to my friend and colleague, Tim Mulligan from C&D, for more detail on what's to come.
As Q alluded, the settlement is a multi-year, multi-plan settlement that goes decades into the future. And it binds the MTA as an institution beyond this existing leadership team to continue the pace of investment that we began in the 20 to 24 capital plan until at least 95% of the system is made accessible through elements like elevators or ramps and the other accessibility features necessary to make a station ADA compliant. The settlement does allow us to continue what we've done, which is selecting the stations and sequencing the stations of accessibility in the order in which they're most beneficial to the community and to the network. And we'll do that with feedback and dialogue with our partners in the disability community and the disability advocates that we actually strengthened our relationship with in the course of the negotiations and the settlement of this case. It was always the intention of all parties to just memorialize what we were doing and ensure that we could continue that pace long into the future. I think nothing illustrates that better than the fact that the 30-plus years that Q alluded to, over that time, cumulatively, we spent $5 billion on ADA accessible. This commits us to the pace of investment of, at least the 5.2, provided we have the resources from the legislature, of at least the 5.2 billion every plan adjusted for inflation into the future, and more if the plan grows beyond the level of inflation. The milestones that are laid out, it's always a challenge to sort of translate those dollar investments into stations, right? Because the stations are different in terms of what they need to be made accessible, how many elevators are required, whether ramps are possible. But the settlement lays out the milestones in 10-year tranches. There were 81 stations that were funded at the time the capital plan was approved in December of 2019. There were the 66 stations in the new plan, as well as holdover stations from the prior plan, 15 to 19, and stragglers from the 10 to 14 as well, the last key station that was awarded last December. We will award all of those stations by the end of this plan in 2025, unless there's real estate or parkland alienation issues that are causing delays. And in the next 10 years or the next 2 plans, we will award another 85 stations, and then the subsequent 2 decades, 90 stations each, which will get us to 95% of the system. And as the comment has been made earlier by the chair and others, that is the minimum, right? If we have engineering and technological solutions to do the stations, which right now, due to constructability issues and the physical characteristics of the station, are nearly impossible, will allow us to go above that level and have more coverage. So we're excited about the settlement, and as President Davey pointed out last week, it was a lot of work to get the settlement, but there's more work ahead of us to get the work done.
Questions, comments? Andrew.
Hi, Tim or Q, either one of you might be able to answer this. When we talk about this new number of stations, we're talking about platform to street, not platform to mezzanine, and then something else to street, correct?
There's some locations where you can do platform to street. There's some locations where, there's issues, you still have to go to mezzanine. Sort of the old design standards was not to do platform to street ever, to always go the mezzanine, and you sort of pushed through that constraint. It's important that we optimize the fewest number of elevators possible to make the station accessible, right? Because the maintainability and having the elevators be operable, as we've heard, has a big impact. It also is a big cost factor, both in the capital investment and in the operating costs after that.
And we're still doing RFPs for groups of stations at a time, correct?
Right. Bundling is a key part of the strategy, which has allowed us to move faster with these investments, right? We think we're getting, good pricing and benefits of scale investments. I think it also sort of incentivizes, the designers to sort of, pick the best elevators. We are awarding these as design, build, maintain. So for the first 15 years of maintenance, which really locks the contractor into the performance of the elevator. Because if the elevator's availability doesn't exceed or equal what we're currently providing in the system, they don't get fully paid. So that goes into the selection of what equipment they install, how they maintain it to ensure that level of reliability for our customers.
Last question. Have you identified possible locations for the new zoning for accessibility piece of funding?
Those applications are coming to us, a lot of them, much more than we thought we were going to receive. We work closely with the development community, and we are in active communication about where there's redevelopment happening, and that's a great point. Andrew, this presentation that we said talked about our work and what we plan to do. As you heard before, zoning for accessibility and other innovative initiatives that we've come up with will help us get there much quicker. We are no longer the only people executing on accessibility at the MTA. Developers are also doing this work with the help of the city and projects like zoning for accessibility. So yes, and I can give you more specifics as
Thank you
projects
so
that have
much.
come up.
Thank
Sure.
Anybody else? Okay. A lot to process, but this is a huge step forward. Next topic we wanted to cover today was the board staff working group that we all participated in, focused on flood resilience. Steve Lohr, you're going to step up and come to the table and do that one, right? I just want to take the opportunity to acknowledge that the settlement wouldn't have happened without a great general counsel leading the legal side of it, Paige Graves, who managed the, as you can imagine, there were a lot of lawyer-to-lawyer discussions, as well as great substantive work by Q and Tim. So, Steve Lohr.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Today I'll be sharing an update on our joint stormwater task force with New York City, and then turning it over to Jamie and Haida, who co-chaired our parallel board working group on flood resilience. But first, I'd just like to start by explaining a little bit about the differences between storm surge and heavy rain and how they affect our system in different ways. It's because when most people think about flooding of the transit system, they often immediately think of Sandy, right? The storm that inundated our tunnels and rail yards back in 2012 caused over $5 billion worth of damage to MTA infrastructure. It's been nearly 10 years since Sandy, and I'm very proud to say we've made tremendous progress in making our system more resilient. We've installed flood walls around low-lying train yards like the one you see here at 207th Street. We've upgraded pumping in our under-river tubes, and we've installed protective devices at over 3,500 different subway openings. And there's no doubt that if another Sandy faced us tomorrow, we'd be far less vulnerable and far better prepared than we were back in 2012. But Sandy's impacts came in the form of storm surge, and flooding from storm surge is fundamentally different than the flooding we experienced during heavy rain events. Storm surge occurs when large volumes of water from the ocean pass over land due to heavy winds during major coastal storms like hurricanes. It's particularly devastating because it brings salt water, which can cause severe corrosion of our infrastructure and equipment. That said, because we know the specific coastal locations that are vulnerable, and because we know these slow-moving storms generally give us several days to prepare, we can take action to suspend service and deploy targeted protection that essentially seals up our vulnerable stations and facilities. Flash floods, on the other hand, can occur whenever heavy rain falls at a rate that exceeds an area's drainage capacity. These typically occur during fast-moving rainstorms, which are much harder to predict in terms of both their timing and their precise location of impact. Basically, they can affect our system anywhere at any time. So this makes it much more difficult to prepare and mobilize, and it means that protective measures need to be what we call fixed in place, designed to function while we're still running service. Now, I will just point out this fresh water is generally not as harmful to our infrastructure as salt water is, but it still has the potential to cause unsafe conditions for our customers and employees, to cause damage to certain types of equipment, and in the most extreme cases, to cause washouts and embankment failures like those we saw along the Hudson Line during Ida, like you see here on the right. Now, as we all know, these heavy rain events are occurring more and more frequently and growing more and more intense, as evidenced by the multiple record-setting rainfalls we experienced last summer. So, recognizing that the MTA cannot tackle this issue on its own, last summer, several weeks before Ida, in fact, I think his first day as interim chair, Chair Lieber charged us with re-engaging the city to improve stormwater management. So we convened a collaborative task force with the City Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Transportation, and Emergency Management. Now, why was it so important to bring all these agencies together? Well, within the 5 boroughs, the MTA depends on the city sewer to collect stormwater, and we rely on the city streets to convey that stormwater to the sewer. And as you can see in this diagram, when water does get into our system, we do pump it out. And while we have an extensive network of pumps that remove nearly 14 million gallons on a typical dry day, we of course pump all that water to the sewer. And so we need there to be enough capacity there to receive it. And during major storms, that can be a challenge. So we started last summer by identifying over 180 MTA locations in the 5 boroughs with some suspected stormwater vulnerability, mostly underground subway stations, but also several bus depots and sites on Long Island Railroad, Metro North, and Staten Island Railway too. Because there aren't any official flood maps for urbanized flash flooding, we drew from a variety of different sources to help assess this risk: our own historical data, the city's future stormwater modeling, even social media content. We strive to be as proactive as possible. It's not just addressing previous trouble spots, but also looking ahead to future areas of concern. And we wound up bringing more than 50 of the most complex sites to the city task force for joint investigation into the underlying causes. So we found a number of different issues with existing infrastructure, including curbs that are far too low to retain water in the street, like you see here on the left, clogged catch basins and drains that can either send water entering into our system from above or backing up into our system from below. And then, of course, in some locations, the surrounding landscape is a contributing factor, as the local topography can lead to runoff cascading downhill directly into our stairs and our vents. Fortunately, there are a variety of different interventions the MTA can implement to protect against flash flooding, including raising our stair landings, as you see here on the top left in Bay Ridge, sealing our conduits, and protecting our vents by either raising them above the sidewalk, like you see in these middle photos, or installing devices inside the vents that actually help moderate the flow of water. And where we've previously been able to install these sorts of devices, they've proven quite successful. So I'm excited to report we're now launching new projects to install raised landings at over 45 stairways and to install vent protection where feasible on up to 90 blocks across the city. I say where feasible because addressing vents is particularly challenging for us. We can't adversely impact their primary function of ventilation, right? And we can't obstruct pedestrian circulation on the sidewalk. And so that means these sorts of measures may not always be possible in more crowded areas of the city. Which brings us to the sorts of interventions that the MTA cannot implement: investments in our streets and in our sewers. Now, our partnership with the city has already been very productive, perhaps most evident in DEP's removal of 3,500 tons of debris to help ensure that sewers near our system are in good working order, which we're very appreciative of. We've also worked with emergency management on their first comprehensive update of the citywide flash flood plan in over 10 years, and we've added a number of MTA priority locations to the city's pre-storm action list. To help keep water away from our subway openings, we've asked DOT to correct inadequate curb heights on more than 80 blocks. This can be done in a variety of different ways, right? During street reconstruction projects, as part of cyclical repaving, or as shown on the top left here, through targeted milling of the asphalt in particular locations to create a deeper gutter for conveying water. DOT has agreed to improve a handful of blocks so far, and we're working with them to overcome different design challenges like adjusting pedestrian ramps at corners so that more locations can be addressed. We've also asked DEP to add or improve catch basins at 16 different locations, and they're working to enhance monitoring, cleaning, and maintenance cycles near our infrastructure, particularly where the sewer dips below the subway, where we're helping them advocate for additional funding. In the meantime, some of these improvements are already underway. A few examples: we've installed a backflow preventer at the site of last year's sewer backup at the 157th Street 1 station. DEP is already adding new catch basins at Dykeman Street up in Inwood, one of which is shown here on the bottom left. And DOT is currently working to improve curb heights on the Grand Concourse around the Fordham Road B&D station. And all of these will help minimize the impacts of heavy rain on MTA's infrastructure.
Fatberg, come on, you put the picture up.
Yes, what started this all up at Dykeman Street last summer, on the right side here is a fatberg that DEP removed on our very first visit up in Inwood. There are many of those. It was a video at one point. We could send that around.
Perhaps a definition of fatberg, please.
What's that?
Perhaps a definition
Oh,
of what a
I don't know.
fatberg.
There's no technical definition. It's a bunch of muck that you pull out of the sewer. Unidentified objects that sometimes are identifiable. But all right, so the ultimate underlying cause of these flood impacts, though, right, is the city's overall capacity for managing stormwater, including a sewer system that's designed to handle 1.65 inches of rain per hour, a rate that we're surpassing on an increasingly routine basis. In fact, Ida brought nearly twice that amount in a single hour. So simply optimizing the existing stormwater capacity of the city, as we've been discussing, won't always be enough. And in many places, the capacity will need to expand, which will require more significant long-term investment. So we've identified more than 45 locations in the vicinity of MTA infrastructure that we think are good candidates for expanding stormwater capacity. We're now working with DEP to determine the best ways of doing so at the first 6 of these, which you see listed here. This may include larger sewers, new connections, force pumping, creative forms of retention, or likely some combination of different measures, and we'll be jointly working through that with DEP over the coming months. Now, we recognize these heavy rain events are here to stay, and we certainly recognize the importance of adapting the MTA to our changing climate. So we're pleased to have the city as a partner on this initiative, and certainly look forward to continuing to advance these investments and many more in the future. Now I'll pass it to our working group co-chairs, Jamie and Haida, to talk about our working group with the board.
Great. Okay. So first, I'd like to say I was really impressed with the amount of work and time put into this effort by the MTA team. Kudos to Steve and his partner in crime, Beth, who's sitting back there. They were actually incredible. And thank you, Jano, and everyone else, Tim, for making this an agency priority and escalating it to the city as well. It was really interesting work and complicated. So when we first started out and put together the working group, we said, okay, let's set out 3 goals, right? So our first goal was to review what flood interventions the MTA is implementing in the near term and how the MTA is collaborating with the city. Second was to encourage the MTA to think about this issue longer term, including other sorts of weather and climate risks. And the third was to better understand what investments were needed from agencies other than the MTA, and to help us as the board advocate for them. So during our meetings, we discussed the availability of data or the lack of information, the operational challenges involved in preparing for and responding to flash floods, which you know is very difficult, and a list of different potential flood mitigation strategies. We even went out to the field to see firsthand how different elements of the city and the subway infrastructure contributed to flooding risks. Okay, so here is what the working group ultimately recommended to staff. The work that the MTA is doing with the city as part of the task force is a great start and should continue to move forward. The short-term recommendations of the task force should be incorporated into the capital plan. The MTA needs to grow its internal capacity for planning and addressing climate risks. We don't mean just flash flooding. I also mean extreme heat, cold, wind, and snow, and everything else Mother Nature throws at us, right? The MTA should create a dedicated team to focus on this sort of climate adaptation planning. One of the things that we learned that was really Wiley, the fact that there was no regional standards on how to address climate change, right? We can't wait for regional standards to be put into place. So we'd like to see the MTA develop a comprehensive stormwater design guideline that incorporate the latest climate science and best practices for mitigation. And finally, the working group recommended that stormwater protection should be fully integrated into the MTA's long-term planning, including the next 20 years needs assessment and the 5-year capital plan. Jamie?
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Steve, and your team, and Haida, of course, for the remarks. I'm going to just layer onto that. I want to thank Jano, of course, for making resiliency an agency priority, and hopefully escalating this to an even more urgent New York City priority. There are innumerable issues out there facing our city today, and bringing climate change to the top of that list is going to be challenging, right? We have just so much on our plate. But as Haida echoed, and Steve initially said, there is not a widely adapted regional planning and management strategy for how to address climate change risk. This is really unfortunate. But from this task force, we'd like to see the MTA assist in developing a comprehensive stormwater design guideline that incorporate, I think you said this already, Haida, climate science, best practices for mitigation. However, I'm suggesting that this be done via integrative planning. IP comprises a system of interlinking actions which serve to bring about lasting improvement in the economic, physical, social, environmental considerations of the region. It's just very more integrative. In IP, all policies and projects are considered in relationship to one another. And I think by applying the integrative planning budgets, I'm looking at Mojica now, budgets may be strategized across city and state agencies, because it's so important to get it from the granular and take the very high level view, or else we spin our wheels just a little too much. So city agencies such as DOT, Steve mentioned the curbs, the paving, their cycles, their work, Department of Parks, DEP, et cetera. The buy-in by agencies and stakeholders is essential. IP will require committed resources and cooperation. It should promote a movement away from the traditional siloed step-by-step planning and move to a more inclusive and interdisciplinary approach across all these agencies that are involved. And this brings me to an important point, a recommended action, actually. Because infrastructure and resiliency are two top priorities of the Biden administration, I suggest that MTA consider a jointly prepared grant application to pursue the new federal funding opportunities for these resiliency projects. Either it's DOT or DEP or Parks, whatever the high partner agencies are, to jointly prepare that application. I think the feds will receive that very well, as long as the commitments are articulated so that the feds don't have to decide on the obligations and the commitments. And we have to do that anyway, so starting an application would probably be the best way to roll up our sleeves and get to work. Well, funding is available and our need is great. Our potential for significant improvement is great. But I think it would be greater if we did this all together with the agencies as one. Board member Poor just said our highest issue going on now is our financial one. These are federal funds that can really help us instead of doing triage after the next IDA. So I don't think, if we don't do this integrated planning, the resiliency planning now, I don't think we ever will. This is our window of opportunity. I just want to emphasize one last point, that what we said today applies to the railroads as well. I understand we have a procurement out for engineering services to assess, I think it's 36 Metro North locations that are potentially vulnerable to washouts, the embankment failures, et cetera. I suggest we do a similar task force, since you guys were so successful, to address the railroad issues in resiliency and IP as well. That's it.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. This is the, hold on. I just want to acknowledge the board participants in the board staff working group, and what we're looking for is to make these board staff working groups generative of new ideas. You see that the staff has built this partnership with the city. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly high functioning, but obviously to to address especially the big issues of the storm sewer system capacity, we will need, a regional approach and a lot more dollars. So in fairness to the city, they have been great partners, but those are ideas that I think would be interesting to pursue. Don't want to put anybody on the spot. Sharif?
I will. Sharif, I hereby bless you to be the coordinator. No, really. If
No,
there's
no.
one guy who could do it, it's you, Sharif.
It's good ideas, and we're thrilled. Now, other comments?
Yeah.
Mr. Mack, yes.
Very well spoken, Jamie. I think the only problem I have with all of this is, where were we after Hurricane Sandy? And we had all these problems. Why didn't we address it? You saw the sign, plan ahead, and they left off a letter. Thank you.
Mr. Albert?
Thanks. I'm wondering if the team looked at third-party intrusion, water intrusion. There have been a lot of places in the subways, particularly, where you can see it's coming from the building above you and not elsewhere. And I'm wondering if you will address those as well.
Yeah, yep, that is part of it. Con Ed in particular, and we haven't mentioned them, but Con Ed has been a partner in this. We've been out to a few different sites where it's really their ducts. Honestly, a big and really interesting part of this is just solving the interconnected mysteries under the street. And I could tell you any number of examples where we've gone out thinking water's coming into our vents, and then nope, it's actually the sewer that's leaking. Nope, it's not leaking. It's Con Ed or Verizon. So yeah, a big part that makes this so challenging is just understanding exactly what is happening between the surface and the subway system. But yeah, Con Ed's been very helpful. Verizon has a few components. Jamie mentioned parks, which we didn't talk about because they're not a primary stakeholder, but they've also had a few different areas where where we interface with them. That could be problematic. So it's a real group effort. It really is. Yep.
Right, and just, Jenna, if I can ask something, and just, so before the Bloomberg administration, there was really no coordination of what happened when somebody opens up the street. When, under Mayor Bloomberg's administration, and not because I was part of it, but we did some sort of, we had some sort of working group that if one street was going to be open to be repaved, they reached out to all the other agencies, whether it was DEP, parks, or anything else, to kind of sort of coordinate what's going on under the street. And I think that type of work needs to continue. If DOT is doing a big milling project, reach out to us and say, what are the the closest subway stations and things like that. And when DEP is, putting in new catch basins or cleaning catch basins, they should do the same.
Anybody else? Thank you. Midori?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was really informative, and thank you to Heda and Jamie. A question regarding these added scopes. That's what it sounds like. You're adding scope to maybe other projects. So do they qualify as capital expense? So just confirming that. And then two, once upon a time, there was discussion around drainage in our subway system and cleanliness of the drainage. And so wondering how that kind of maintenance and operations fits into the work that you're doing.
Yep, sure, good questions. So it's really two things. Primarily, we are launching a new project at stairs that we're not planning to be touched, that we've identified as vulnerable. Same thing with events. I didn't touch on it, but there are a number of projects that we've found where we're already doing work and there's an opportunity, hey, as we're making the station accessible while we have the staircase closed, let's put in a landing there. So as part of our sort of prioritization of these investments, there are places that were tagged as opportunistic, and when we touch something, let's make sure we build it in a more resilient way, and other ones that are more targeted, let's make sure we create a project that specifically addresses this because we know this is a vulnerable location. On the drain cleaning and maintenance of that, so I think the big investment that occurred, 4 years ago now, 5 years ago with the Subway Action Plan that invested significantly in our drain cleaning and our vent maintenance programs has made a big improvement on this, which is why we've seen sort of less of these more frequent flash flood impacts in recent years and just more of these really big intense ones where there's no amount of cleaning that can make our vents that can provide enough capacity in our vents and our drains to handle that amount of water. But certainly as we've gone out and investigated some of these places, that is part of the problem, right? And if there's a clog or a backup, we're able to triage that as part of these site visits. That's why not every single one of these problem spots is something that warrants the city's attention. We're happy to have everyone out there trying to figure out exactly what the problem is. Sometimes it is us, and it's good to have a forum to be able to quickly resolve that.
I just want to remind everybody that after Hurricane Ida, the system did an incredible job of clearing water, right? We have the system that we have given to us by our ancestors, our subway ancestors, did 90 million gallons of water in that day or so in and around Hurricane Ida. So tremendous capacity to clear water, and that's what enabled us to run service literally a couple of hours after that 3.5 inch rainstorm in a single hour. So there are improvements that have to be made, and we have to keep on top of it, but the system has been incredibly designed to clear water. And that's why we have to strengthen the partnership with the storm sewer system that the city controls, because we're putting a lot of water into their system. Mr. Bringaman.
Yes, I just want to follow up on what Andrew had said earlier. We really do also need to work with landlords that have space above our facilities. The biggest case in point is Penn Station. Madison Square Garden up above, One Penn Plaza. I know we are, in that particular location, addressing it. In fact, when we did a walkthrough, I asked one of the project managers, and he happened to say that you'd have his head on a platter if there was any leakage after the renovation was completed. And I'll take him at his word for that. But I'm sure there are many, many other places within our system where we're getting water in that the landlords really should be addressing, and we should try and work on that if we can, or where we can. I know it's a big legal issue.
Point taken, yeah. Mr. Miranda.
Thank you very much. Stephen, I have seen in the past public education campaigns for customers to understand the impact of trash in the tracks. Have that been something that continues to be a problem, trash removal, or even the contribution of customers just disposing trash in an appropriate way?
I think it's part of it. I think just as much as of that being a problem in the subway system, I think we've found going out onto the streets that whether it's trash or other debris, things matting over the catch basins, right? Again, this is trying to tackle water before it gets into the subway, less triage when it does get in the subway. So that's definitely an area where we've seen sort of a recurring contributing factor is stuff building up over the catch basins. One of the agreements with sanitation and with DEP is now they're going to go out to a whole bunch of our priority spots before every major rainstorm to make sure those are cleaned and just do quick double checks. So hopefully that will be less of an issue over time. But yeah, that's part of the challenges of solving this in New York is we have to deal with all those issues.
Right, and remember the challenges we have sometimes is when these storms are coming, even the meteorologists don't predict what level of rainfall we're going to get, right? You can say a half inch and then 3 inches later, and then everyone blows up on
the
video.
difference between it a couple, quarter mile difference in a particular storm cell can make all the difference in a place that has never flooded before, suddenly flooding one time this particular day that may never flood again. The dynamic nature of the streets here too, right? We noticed this past summer in particular, the outdoor dining structures in a lot of places really altered the flow of water on the streets, sometimes in helpful ways for us, sometimes in unhelpful ways, but it's just a problem that's always evolving. So yeah, that's an interesting part.
Okay.
Chair, if I may,
Please.
hi, Chair, if I may, just by way of wrap up, if the board has completed commenting, just to make 2 points. One is to emphasize the quality of the partnership that we have with the city on responding to these issues, which has been done. But I want to also note that the mayor's chief climate officer, who's also the commissioner of DEP, is very focused on this partnership. We've had a great dialogue, and the key thing I think was raised by the board. There will be capital that's needed to make these interventions, and it's not in our program right now. So we have a commitment by the city that they are looking at identifying sources of funding for additional projects. And I think that, as Jamie said, the going to seek additional sources of funding together is a great idea, but we will, and we'll be working with Board Member Solomon on that. The second thing is just in terms of the recommendations that we've heard from the working group, looking ahead, we are creating a climate planning unit within our long-term planning unit that will generate projects and identify opportunities to put into the 20-year needs assessment to get into the next capital program. So we are acting on that recommendation now.
For Brown.
Yeah, I'm someone who's the the dark arts of accounting are kind of lost on me, and I don't. Over the years, it seems to me that these sort of drainage, constant maintenance issues were supposed to come out of the operating budget, and that by my understanding, again, my primitive understanding, is that over the years it became a place to do it at another time and take the money from there and put it somewhere else. Now, these changes we made since the last storm, before the next storm, does that change how this is paid for? Are these reimbursable budget pays for cleaning these drains that, to me, we should have been cleaning all along? But where's the money come from then? Is this all going to be capital money now?
I don't think no one's trying to effectuate a major transfer. Some of that was a part of the subway action plan, but I'm going to look at Mr. Mulligan to give us any clarity if you can.
Yeah, it was a big part of the subway action plan, and there's ongoing subway action plan money which is operating, that's spent through subways, that maintains those drains that were initially cleaned after the years of neglect that you alluded to as part of the subway action plan. But it is operating. So some of these interventions are operating, and the long-term ones that are physical infrastructure changes are capitally funded.
Thank you.
I think we've gotten everybody.
Yeah. We have a new...
Mr. Mack, do you want to be recognized?
Yeah. We have a new sanitation commissioner, and we should work with her. She's new, she's effective, and I think it'll be a boon to us as an agency to keep our drains clean as well.
Okay. So let's move on to the regular board business. So the ritual approval of the minutes is before us, the 20th anniversary version. The minutes of the May board meeting and the minutes from each committee have been distributed to all members. Are there any corrections or omissions?
A couple.
Okay.
On page 7, there's some examples of where ridership has really picked up over the pandemic, and one of them is Ozone Park and Woodside. It gives trains, but none of them serve Woodside, so it's probably missing a 7 or an M or an R there, but no examples of trains that serve Woodside there. So that should be fixed. Then on page both 12 and 13, there's a reference to the station where that unfortunate individual fell on the tracks. It says Grant Street. It should be Grant Avenue. Other than that, that's it.
Okay. Any other comments or corrections? Okay. I'll move the minutes. Second.
Second.
All approved. Any opposition? The minutes are approved.
Chairman, I'm sorry. I'm going to abstain since I wasn't present at the May meeting.
Thank you for that. Let the record reflect that Lisa Soren has abstained. The Bridges and Tunnels and Joint Railroad Committees meet on Monday. However, there are no items being reported for board approval. If there are no further reports from the chairs of these committees, we'll move on to New York City Transit. Mr. Mack and Mr. Fleischer. Anything further? Okay. Chair Mahaltzis, New York City Transit Committee.
Chair, the New York City Transit Committee met on Monday and reports the following. There are 4 procurement items this month for a total of $11.4 million. The first 3 are contract modifications, and the 4th is an RFP authorizing resolution. The committee recommends these items, and I move them.
Any, all in favor? Any opposition? The items carry.
This concludes
yeah.
the New York City Bus and Transfer report.
Okay, so we're turning to the capital report. I just want to take a moment to recognize a retirement. Tom Savio, who has been the head of the Office of Construction for some time, is retiring after 30 years. Tom, are you in the room? No? But
Where is he?
Tom was just a great MTA leader for quite some time, and he has, Tom, oh, you're on. Tom has triplets, and they're headed to college next year, so we forgive you for retiring and seeking other employment. Tom, congratulations. You're muted, Tom. Tom, go ahead.
Can you hear me? I'm
yes,
sorry.
We can. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to say thank you so very much. It's been a wonderful journey. I think I worked really earnestly for all these years, so I'm very proud of what I did, but it's all been because of the family that's here and all the friends and all the support from all the different groups, yourself included. So thank you so very much for recognizing me. I really appreciate it.
Well done. Happy trails. Board Member Zuckerman, would you deliver the capital?
I would,
Committee
sir.
report?
Yes, thank you very much. We have one procurement action this month for $1.2 million. This committee recommends this action, and I move it.
Second? All in favor? Any opposition? The item carries. Mr. Zuckerman, would you move on to the Finance Committee report?
I will. We met on Monday, and I'd like to report the following. First, just related to your point earlier about the potential change with the July plan, the Finance Committee is aware and certainly shares the chair and Mr. Poor's remarks, so thank you for that. We are focused on understanding the issues, and the committee feels, I think I speak for all of us, highly confident in our CFO and his team in bringing us all the options possible. So that will be a very important conversation we have in front of the board next month. On to the more mundane business. There are 3 action items this month. The first item seeks board approval of the changes to the all-agency procurement guidelines. Second item requests board approval to authorize actions related to the payment of the state assessment on the MTA and its constituent agencies for the Public Work Enforcement Fund for 2022. And finally, the board, we seek board approval to establish a budget and execute the items necessary to finalize the procurement of an owner-controlled insurance program, the OSIP, for projects covering June 30th, 2022 through June 2023. The committee recommends these items, and I move them.
So before I ask for a second on that, I just want to acknowledge that the OSIP procurement is a kind of an incredible story. I worked for many years in development, and the cost of construction insurance has soared over the last 15 years, and it was headed towards 10%. Under Jamie's leadership, and I think this was discussed at committee, so I'm being a little redundant, but I'm going to do it anyway, which under Jamie's leadership, there was a study undertaking of how to manage the MTA's OSIP, owner-controlled insurance programs cost. There was a new broker procurement undertaken. There was a new procurement of insurance undertaken. And it led to close to halving we seem to be headed towards 10% of construction cost, and we ended up at a procurement that gives us a 5.3%, which is going to save, Jamie, what's the number? It's like $50+ million.
We estimate $60 to $95 million.
I mean, it really, a very in an environment where we're all talking about construction inflation, a really positive development. So with that, I'll ask for a second on the motions. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? The items carry.
All right, thank you. I do want to quote something Jamie said to the committee at the time, which is that funding is sufficient to making a station ADA compliant. So that, I thought, was a great way of contextualizing and justifying the action besides just fundamentally additional money to the MTA. There are 6 real estate action items this month. The committee recommends these items, and I move them.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposition? The items carry.
All right, Mr. Chair, this concludes the report, please.
All right, now can I have a motion to adjourn? We went a little long.
So moved.
Second, we are adjourned. Thank you. One of my great memories of the COVID era was the tequila collection. Okay, so this was a kind of momentous board meeting. What we're seeing is the MTA under Governor Hochul's leadership attacking the hard issues, and I'm actually super proud of that. The ADA, the settlement of the plan for achieving full accessibility to the subway system there was a battle going on for, I think 10 years. We got that resolved last week and talked about it a lot today. But we're redesigning the entire bus network, borough by borough. You heard a lot about the Bronx Bus Redesign and how the implementation is going, which is strong, but also about the work that's being done on the Queens Bus Redesign. Starting next week, I think, Rich, we're going out, in addition to all of the outreach we've done on a community by community board basis, we're going out with in-person, what we call pop-up outreach in a lot of different kinds of locations. So that is really attacking this issue of buses, because, as I keep saying, buses are the engines of equity, and they reach a lot of neighborhoods where people are truly dependent on the transit system. Penn Station, obviously, a couple weeks ago, we hit a big milestone on kicking off the procurement for the design, the full design of the new Penn Station. And obviously, I spent a lot of time in dialogue with the State Senate last week. But under Governor Hochul's instructions, we are prioritizing fixing Penn Station now. And we had the worker protection bill that we pushed for hard together with our unions that was signed this week, which makes it, which gives protection against attacks, which are becoming more rampant against our transit workers, to all of the MTA workers for the first time. And most important, an issue that has gotten a lot of public attention is the milestone we hit on congestion pricing, which is everybody's been worrying, and I talked about it a lot, about that we were incurring delays in congestion pricing because of the complexity of the back and forth with the federal government. Well, we broke through. We resolved the issues with our friends at the Federal Highway Administration, which is the agency of jurisdiction supervising our federal environmental review. It's called NEPA. And we did all the analysis. The new data was collected. The new modeling was done. We put it all into a rewrite of the environmental assessment document, and that was submitted in the last few days to the USDOT, the Federal Highway Administration, and that was a huge milestone. And Governor Hochul was pushing with us and for us in Washington. So big issues, and obviously is a point of pride for me and for the MTA that we're attacking them and making progress. So with that, Tim, let the impresarioing begin.
Well, we start today with Clayton Gusa of the New York Daily News. Clayton, good afternoon.
Phonist who was arrested. He's a guy that's down in the stations all the time, playing a horn surrounded by animatronic Furby or cat dolls. He's silly. Is that the kind of enforcement that you were hoping the PD would bring when you called for a better working relationship with the cops?
Well, yeah, I think what we're trying to do is ask everybody, and again, it's universal, to play by the rules of the subway system. One of those rules is please don't get in the way of the operation and people moving around. I don't know all the specifics, but apparently there were complaints from station operations personnel that he was in the way, and the police, obviously came in and tried to get him to comply, but for whatever reason he didn't want to. So all we're asking is everybody play by the same rules, and we're all going to have a better subway system and work together, because it's kind of our shared space. So everybody needs to play by the same rules in the public space. For whatever reason, he didn't want to. And I got to support the PD. They're doing their best to try to make sure that folks are playing by the rules.
Is busking illegal in the subway? Panhandling is. Busking might be a form of panhandling. So is this a message to all the musicians in the subway that they should clear it out?
Clearly not, because I know you ride a fair amount, and I know you see that there's lots of performers in the system, and we welcome them. So it's part of the New York subway culture. We all have our favorite performers in different stations and look forward to seeing them. And we do welcome them, but everybody's got to play by the rules so you're not inhibiting operations or creating a safety condition. Apparently, that was what was at issue here.
Okay, and then the other thing I wanted to ask on was you ended the COVID testing program. You announced that today.
Yeah.
How much did the MTA spend this year on testing and vaccinated workers? And have you confirmed that that's reimbursed by FEMA, et cetera?
Yeah, it is all covered by FEMA. And I don't know the exact number, so I'll look into it for you. But clearly, it was a success because we managed to keep our workforce safe and also to minimize additional crew shortage losses while we were doing it. So that's what I was trying to convey today is we got through the tough part of COVID. Obviously, COVID is not or may not be over. We're obviously still in the process of figuring it out, but clearly the health professionals have said that we're in a position where we can adjust our model, and that's what we've done at the MTA.
All right, we move on to Anna Lay of the New York Times. Anna.
Hey, Jano. I wanted to follow up on one of Clayton's questions. There was a lot of outcry last month about the mango vendor. Now people are upset about the Saks guy. Excuse me. There's pushback, to this kind of, to targeting these people on the subway, and some people are saying, like, this is not what we're worried about, when we're concerned about public safety or just inappropriate behavior in the subway system, people are saying these are not the people to go after. Can you talk about that balance and, what's kind of your general reaction to these, pretty high-profile incidents?
Well, I object to the form of your question, the idea that there's any targeting. So clearly, this is a guy who's performed in the system before, and he has, I don't know that he's had problems. What prompted this, as again, I don't know all the specifics, what prompted this was that he was operating in a way he was putting out his dancing toys with him in a way and operating in a way that got in the way of people moving. So folks who are responsible for making sure that the system operates, that people can move around the system, asked him to stop, and when he wouldn't, then the police got involved and so on. So there's no targeting going on whatsoever. All that what we're asking the police to do is to enforce the rules of conduct, and most of what they are focusing on are things that that are disturbing to a lot of people, and whether or not this is disturbing to you, it interfered with the operation of the system. So our folks have to pay attention to that. It's a safety issue, and they did. And I'm not going to undermine the police in their effort to, in a very responsible and professional and slow way. I've seen the video, and they tried to persuade him to relocate and to do his show in a different way in a different location, but for whatever reason he didn't want to. So I don't think in any way it's targeting anybody.
All right, we go to Jose Martinez of the City and Don Pepe's Deli. Good afternoon, Jose.
Okay, I'm officially declaring the end of the Don Pepe jokes. Jose Martinez is much more than just a patron of Don Pepe's Deli.
It's not a joke, sir.
He's much more than a
recommending
patron,
12.
merely a patron of the Don Pepe's Deli. He's
I'm going to have to find the new Twitter rap for you. Jano, has there been any update to the initial McKinsey projections on the number or the percentage of subway riders that will shift to other modes, such as cycling or walking? And to those who have shifted to other modes and said, for whatever reason, the subway is not for me, how do you win them back?
Okay, so it's a good question. The whole analysis of the whole projection is obviously projection. So this is not a perfectly exact science, but we are updating it and there's a lot of work going into it, and you're going to see that reflected in the July plan. So this is a work in progress, and the main thing I've acknowledged is it is highly likely that it's going to be less optimistic than the projections we were using before, because we've all seen how the trajectory of the return to subway ridership especially has flattened out to some degree. Interestingly, we had another record on the Long Island Railroad and Metro North just yesterday. We are consistently hitting new records on the commuter railroads. So that's a positive sign. But as I've said before, what seems to be suppressing the revenue and the ridership on the subway system is the shortage of in Manhattan trips. You've got a little less tourism-related trips, and you've also got less people going to sales calls and business meetings because in-person work is at so much lower level. So that, in addition to lower commuting, is what we're missing. I can't answer the question to you about specifically how much of what's missing is attributable to folks choosing to walk or bike or take other modes. But that it is something that we're going to study very closely and try to learn from.
I believe, and I'll get this from the press shop, that it was fairly low, around 2%. So I'm just trying to see if there was any update, but obviously
Not this time, but we'll, again, at the risk of saying it's a fair question, we will look into it and try to dig in a little bit as we learn more from what we're actually seeing as opposed to projections.
All right, keeping the streak alive on Zoom participation, we do have now Steve Nesson joining us on the Zoom machine from WNYC and the Gothamist. Steve, good afternoon. And you'll need to unmute.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hi, Jano. Thanks, Tim. Apologies, I just joined, so I don't know if you already answered this about congestion pricing, but congratulations on moving forward. And I guess my question is, I see this report from reInvent Albany that calls the current capital plan historically low funding. It's only received 7% of the funds budgeted, and with the delay in congestion pricing starting, from your perspective right now, how much will the delay in the start of congestion pricing impact the capital plan?
Okay, so I appreciate the report's conclusion that we need congestion pricing to fund the capital program. That's absolutely correct, and we're operating. One of the reasons we're forging ahead as quickly as we can is we do need it. The other information or other conclusions about how well-funded the capital program is right now and the pace and trajectory of expenditure, I'm not sure I totally buy. And just a couple of fun facts. We have no cash flow issues on the capital program, number one. Number two, any apples to apples comparison of the expenditure in the capital program needs to take into account the fact that we had, 15 to 18 month delay in our ability to award 20 to 24 projects because of COVID. You all know what happened. We were holding off because we needed to know what we were getting from Washington. So there was a significant delay to the award of projects. Therefore, the cash flow is delayed, and the analysis should, maybe ought to reflect that. But next week there's going to be a $700 million debt issuance under the wise hands of Mr. Willens with a new credit. It's the city sales tax component of the capital component, which is going to be borrowed against, and we've already had a good rating process on that. So we're very optimistic. Both the city and the state are making good on their capital program commitments. In the past, there's been discussion about whether that was happening. They are, and in fact, if you look at the current state fiscal year and next fiscal year, it actually specifically calls it out. So we don't right now have any cash flow issues, and the capital program is actually moving forward very much as we had hoped in terms of the pace of contract award and the work getting done. But reInvent Albany is right. At the end of the day, we're going to need that $15 billion. We're going to need to have congestion pricing implemented and the revenue from it so we can bond against it. And that's one of the reasons that we are forging ahead as we are with congestion pricing.
All right, and with finance on the table, we forge ahead to Michelle Caskey of Bloomberg News. Michelle.
Hey, Jano. Earlier, you guys have been projecting that you'd have a potential deficit in 2025 of about $500 million, and then a deficit of $2 billion in 2026. So when you say that it's possible those are going to grow, do you have any estimate of how much they can grow by, or what the new, the numbers might be?
It's sort of
or-
premature to say, but
Yeah.
both facts that you cited are relevant. One is, when does the deficit hit, or the fiscal cliff hit at what level, and how much is the long-term fiscal cliff? And I think that, again, I'm trying to just be transparent about the fact that I think on both counts, we may have worse numbers than we've had before. The fiscal cliff may come forward in time because we'll be using up the federal money more quickly with less as a result of the reduction in revenue. And second, the long-term fiscal structural deficit may grow in size. So I don't know the exact numbers, but those are two big highlights that we're just making sure everyone understands that's where we think this may be headed.
Have you guys looked towards what other systems around the country, what they do, and what their states, how their states help them out? Because as you know
Right.
very well, that other systems don't rely on the fare box as much. They have to use other revenue. So are there other types of revenue streams that you guys think would work well for MTA?
Well, at the end of the day, you've heard this before from this podium for years, which is the MTA is and has to be agnostic about how Albany and other stakeholders fund our operating budget. We have to give them the flexibility to make those decisions at the end of the day. What we're raising is that we're just making sure everybody understands that the picture is very serious looking forward. We have looked at other places around the country, and other places are looking at fiscal cliffs as well, although they're not of the same scale because the systems are so much smaller. So, I'm pretty sure if you look at what's going on in Chicago, they're anticipating a significant gap of, as well. Again, much smaller in size, but proportionally pretty significant as well. Others also, I know Washington has, some pretty complicated situations in front of it. So, yeah, we're looking closely. But as you say, the key is nowhere has the funding of the transportation system been more dependent on the fare box, has more of the cost of operating the system been put on the riders' backs than New York. And we want to make sure, as we work with Albany to solve this problem, that it's not all about fare hikes. That's something that we're very clear about.
All right, next is David Meyer of the New York Post.
Hello, Jano. Thank you for taking my question. I was hoping you could respond to comments today by Eric Adams related to congestion pricing. I will read them to you so that we are on the same page. He said, I think there are some other exemptions. I think those who are low-income New Yorkers must use vehicles. Let's say if you have to go to chemo at a certain hospital, we should take that into consideration. And so it shouldn't just be a blanket of we're not exempting anyone, as you and I know Leroy Comrie has suggested. And it can't just be city vehicles. I'm open to a real conversation and hearing from those who must use vehicles. It's different from being a luxury. From a necessity. And there are some cases where I believe it isn't explicit, and I'm open to that conversation. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think there should be exemptions? I know you've said you don't want to weigh in on this, but at a certain point, doesn't that affect the MTA's bottom line? And also, the more exemptions, the higher the toll, right?
Well, that is the key point, is that, number one, the question of what is the toll, what are the exemptions, and what are the discounts, which are all connected, is going to be decided by the body that was the legislature created, the TMRB, Traffic Mobility Review Board, which is going to be impaneled to make those decisions, okay? And the more exemptions and discounts there are, the higher inevitably the base toll will have to be. As Senator Comrie, who's the senator with the Committee of Jurisdiction in the Senate, Senator Comrie has said there ought to be fewer or no exemptions. So there are a lot of views out there. We have to let the TMRB do its work balancing those. The most important point which you made is that it has to measure out, according to legislation, in enough revenue for the MTA so that we are able to bond to get $15 billion for the capital program. So if there are more exemptions and more discounts, there will be a higher toll because it all has to equal enough revenue to turn into $15 billion of bonding. That's the trade-off that the TMRB is going to have to resolve.
Understood. And unrelated question. Last week, my colleague and I reported that a 3D printer was allegedly stolen from an MTA location. I'm wondering how many 3D printers the MTA has, and given that these devices can possibly make gun parts, whether you've taken steps to secure them since that occurred.
I'm going to have to get back to you. I can't answer that. I have no comment, no
Understood.
ability to comment on that right now.
Understood.
Okay.
All right, let's go out east to Alfonso Castillo of Newsday. Alfonso,
You're
good
really
afternoon.
you're going to give the Zoom priority over somebody sitting at the table for
We're going to
hours?
go out east, and then we're going to come back west.
Okay, good.
We like to end in the room,
All
which
right.
we will do momentarily.
Alfonso, you're
Alfonso,
muted.
if you unmute, we'll have a better conversation.
We're still waiting for you to unmute, Alfonso.
All right, he has a quality microphone, but the mute button is difficult. We'll come back to you, to Dave Colon of Streets Blog, who is, in fact, in the room. Dave.
I am here. Thank you. Hey, Jano. A couple months ago, I asked you about updates on weekend service, whether riders could look forward to it, getting a little bit less excruciating. You said you were going to look into it, especially in relation to, obviously, capital work the MTA does. But my colleague Clayton over here wrote a story this week talking about the change in timetables across the system, and weekend service is still kind of not being talked about because of the capital work, was what was said. Are riders ever going to be able to kind of look at something and show up and to the C train and not have an 11-minute wait as the best you're going to get?
Listen, I know that there's a fair amount of work. Rich, why don't you come talk about the work?
Yeah, no,
that
if
you're
you were
doing.
Rich, want to talk, what is being looked at and can be done?
Yeah, so if I was hard to hear you. So I think a few points. Number one, as mentioned, we have looked at the timetables for weekdays and made improvements in the 2, 3, 4, 5. Obviously, we've talked about bus redesign at a number of points, but we're looking obviously at bus service as well. On nights and weekends, and actually I would even say Mondays and Fridays, we are taking a fresher look at the service we are providing, putting aside capital for a moment, which I'll get to. Because we're seeing ridership, at least in the subways, and certainly in bus too a bit, to be softer on Mondays and Fridays. I think this goes to Jano's earlier point about our finances, right? So how are folks actually using our service and system? So I think for us, a question which we don't have an answer for yet is should we be offering something other than night, weekend, and weekday service? Should there be a hybrid, for example, on Mondays and Fridays? So I think that's one point. On the capital question, I would just say this. We've convened a team actually earlier this week to look at how we are operating our services, shuttle bus service, for example, and other alternative services that we're providing, because the capital work you mentioned is going to continue. I mentioned, I think a couple weeks ago, I myself was on a shuttle bus and observed, I think, some improvements that we can make. So we're taking that very, very seriously.
And then going back to what a couple people have asked you about so far, when these kind of high-profile quality of life arrests end up happening on the system, the city, the MTA kind of goes back to this idea that, well, this had to happen. We have to follow the rules. The rules mean order. Everybody has a better time if everybody's following the rules and there's order. We're deterring, more high-profile crimes, dangerous crimes. Are these arrests really the kind of thing that are deterring pickpockets or people who are going to assault people or other things like that? If somebody sees a saxophone player getting arrested, are they going to go, well, I better not?
Just clarify, he wasn't arrested. He was given a summons, and he was just
He was handcuffed and
he was given a
dragged
summons.
out there.
He was not arrested. He was given a summons. Anyway, listen, I can't. I'm just going to decline the opportunity to micromanage the police who are just doing their best to try to keep the system functional and make sure that areas are the people can move around stations and that everybody plays by the same rules. So you get to second guess every activity that ends up on social media that the police engage in. I understand that that's going to be your job. It's not mine. I'm going to say as long as the NYPD is doing their best to help us maintain and upgrade the sense of order and rule and sort of that everybody's playing by the same rules, I want to support them. And in that case, I think the officers were really did their level best to try to avoid any kind of a confrontation. It was, in the end, unavoidable.
We're going to close it out with Alfonso Castillo, who we think has figured out the logistics. Alfonso.
Yes, hi. Sorry about that. I'm on different technology than usual. Jano, I'm joining late, so I'm sorry if this has been addressed already, but there were a number of public speakers who raised some concerns about these new schedules for East Side Access, for Grand Central Madison. I've heard from a number as well who say their commutes are going to get worse. It's going to add significantly to their travel time. That's certainly the case for Brooklyn riders and for Port Washington riders. But I've heard on a number of branches, people are seeing a few extra minutes of travel time. Others have said they actually kind of lose some options with the trains alternating between the two terminals. If they're going to Penn, they may have to wait longer for the Penn train or coming back from Penn. So in general, what do you say to a lot of folks who are unimpressed with these schedules and are concerned that after all these years and after all this money spent, East Side Access is essentially going to be a service cut for them?
Okay, well, we're not going to make apologies for increasing Long Island Railroad service by more than 40% on the inbound and 50% on the outbound. We're just not going to apologize for it, and we think this is an amazing positive step. Among other things that, your sort of anecdotal report doesn't take account of is the incredible benefit to Long Island businesses and the whole economy of Long Island of having first-time meaningful reverse commuting. That means that a business in Long Island has the opportunity to draw a workforce from the city in a way that really wasn't possible before. So we think this is great. We understand that everybody wants a one-seat ride. We'd all take a one-seat ride door to door if we could. But we think that overall the increased level of service and amazing increase in frequency. If you're in Jamaica Station, you're going to see trains going to the city in the morning coming through as fast as the Lexington Avenue line. And you'll be able to get on a Penn or a Grand Central. So I don't think that the connection aspect of it is going to be as burdensome as some folks may have articulated to you. So we're really optimistic. I am a Brooklyn rider. I love the Atlantic branch. And although it only represents well less than 10% of our ridership, we actually think that having more, having this system where you're going to have more service to and from Jamaica to Atlantic is going to connect everybody in Brooklyn, including my neighbors, to the whole Long Island Railroad system much more regularly and have much more frequency so they can get into the whole system because they're going to have so much more service, and they're going to have reverse commute service, as I said, meaningful reverse commute service for the first time. So we think this is great, and respectfully would ask folks to give it a chance to unfold. Obviously, there's a unique circumstance in Port Washington where, because of local decision-making, we couldn't get an extra yards, which that is constraining our ability to put additional service, additional trains on the Port Washington line. I know there's been some discussion about that issue and going forward. But overall, no apologies for increasing Long Island Railroad service to the city by 40% in the morning and 50% outbound in the evening, and providing first-time reverse commute. It's great for the region. It's something that everyone's been fighting for, and we're thrilled that we're able to do it. Kathy.
Yeah, nothing really much more to add. The only thing that we haven't been talking about that much that I want to put out there is what this is overall doing for customers within the city of New York. I mean, that's really been a hallmark of Jano's tenure here to try to increase service and commuter rail opportunities for commuters in the city. So overall, this service plan is going to increase service to city stations by 38%, and you can pick out any one of these city stations to show how the increases in service opportunities in both directions are really going to improve commutation opportunities for our riders in the city.
And that's in tandem, increased service along with the city ticket that we've inaugurated, which has the basically half fare on the off-peak for folks who are moving within the city station. So some of that extra space that's on the railroad right now we hope will allow New York City residents to use the railroad to shorten their commutes.
All right, thanks, Jano. Kathy, Rich Davey, we're good. And good afternoon.